to the first day on our Early Buddhist Meditation course, brought to you by Sutta Central and Nagananda Buddhist University. And we're very honoured to have such a beautiful venue, and very honoured to have all of you people here to join us. We're not in a shrine room or anything, so we don't have a Buddha image or anything to bow to, but maybe we can just begin the course with a short recitation of Namo Tassa together. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. So we've all joined together for this coming period of time to learn about the Dhamma, to practice the Dhamma, and to try to deepen our own wisdom and our own insights. So I want to ask for everybody that, please pay attention, please practice mindfulness, please use this as part of your practice to deepen your spiritual growth and lead towards freedom. Yes, we are here to learn what the texts say, here to learn what the history says, and we're here to use critical and analytical techniques. But these are all something which are in service of a higher goal, and that higher goal is freedom. So we don't want to put down something just so we can pick something up again, right? The Buddha said that the teachings are like a raft. We use a raft for crossing over the river, but when we reach the far shore of the river, we leave the raft behind so that the next person can use it. Yeah? So when we're practicing, so pay attention. I always remember the first Dhamma talks that I ever went to in Thailand, a monastery called Wat Rampang. And we did a meditation retreat there, Mahasi-style Vipassana retreat. And during the retreat, they didn't really teach us anything. They just taught us how to meditate. But after the retreat, they put on Abhidhamma courses for the retreatants. This was very exciting for me. I knew literally nothing about Buddhism, like nothing at all. And the first class we went to, they had a blackboard, and then he starts writing up about the 17 mind moments in the Abhidhamma and these things. And I was blown away. I was like, wow, that's incredible. They plunged us in right in the deep end. But I always remember those classes because the Thai monk who was teaching them was very good. And he began his class, he said, when you are sitting, listening to Dhamma, be mindful. Yeah? Be mindful of your posture. Be mindful of your thoughts. Yeah? Be mindful of your mood. Yeah? So listening to Dhamma is part of our Dhamma practice. So this is something that if we are able to listen in the right way, then that will help to lead us towards liberation. It's an essential part of our Dhamma practice. Now, for this course, there will be a combination of different kinds of content. Some of the time, I'm going to be sitting here and talking to you like this. It's my job as a teacher, right? But I'm not going to be doing that all the time because A, it gets boring, and B, it's not a very good way to learn. If you're just listening, then it's not a good way to learn, and any teacher would know that. So we also have to have an interactive element. So as well as the teaching presentations, I also want to encourage everybody to ask questions. Okay, and I will also be asking questions of you. All right. And some of people who know me, some of my students from Sydney, are getting a bit nervous at this point because they know what kind of questions that I'm likely to ask, okay? So I want to ask questions for you so that I can know that you're paying attention. And I want you to ask me questions, especially when there is something that you don't understand, okay? However, let me just say, okay? Now, I've been a monk for 28 years now, as I worked out the other day, 28 years. And in that time, I have been an exceptionally slow student. And I have very little wisdom, and I have learned very, very few things. And I have very little wisdom or insight. But I have learned one thing, and I have learned what a question is. And this is wisdom I am going to impart to you now, and I want you to remember it. What is a question? A question is short, it is clear, it is purposeful. It aims to elicit meaningful information. It begins with what, where, why, how, or who, and it has one short sentence without subsidiary clauses. You can see that I've had a lot of experience in doing this, right? And it is not a reflection, it is not a biography, okay? It is not an exploration, okay? It is a question. For example, Tanking manyata bhikkhave rupang nichang va anichang vati. What do you think? Is form permanent or impermanent? That's a question. The Buddha knew how to ask questions. So I encourage you to ask questions, okay? But during the main session is not the time for long-winded discussions and discussions. There is a time for those, and that time is not now. If you're not sure, right, write it down. You've got a little notepad, write down your question. Begin it with what, where, why, how, or who. Have one short thing, and then ask, okay? And one of the reasons for doing that is because it's respect for the fellow participants, and because they want to know, but also it's respect for me, because as a teacher, I often, when anybody asks me a question, I always take that question seriously, and I always want to give the best possible answer I can to really satisfy that person. But I can't if I can't understand what the person is asking. Yeah? I'm trying to understand it, but I can't. So it's really important when you're formulating questions to take the time and the care to formulate them clearly. Okay? Yeah. Now this is a very important part of early Buddhism, actually. Look in the suttas. How many suttas are in a Q&A format? So many, right? We just had a quote now from the Anatalakkhana Sutta. Yeah? The Buddha asking the monks, what do you think? Tanking manyata. How many times does that phrase occur in the Pali Canon? Many times, hundreds of times. The Buddha is saying, what do you think? Getting an answer. He's engaging with his audience. Yeah? Not just lecturing to him. In fact, there are very few discourses where the Buddha would just sit down and just give one long lecture. Very few. There are some, Brahmajala Sutta, for example, long discourse the Buddha gives, but not so many, actually. Most of the discourses are quite short, and even the longer ones, they're usually some kind of question or dialogue. Again, these are the kinds of things that we can learn from the study of the suttas. Yeah? And to me, this is the difference between reading and studying the suttas and reading and studying something about Buddhism. Yeah? When I read a book about Buddhism, then they will take the teachings and they'll say, this is what the Buddha said about the Four Noble Truths, this is what the Buddha said about the Eightfold Path. Okay, that's fine. But you're not hearing the voice of the Buddha. You're not looking at the way that the Buddha spoke about those things. Why did he speak about it in this way with this person at this time? Why did he speak about it like that way with that person at this time? Why did he engage? And we see so many different manners in which the Buddha engaged with the people he was talking. So this is one of the great things that we can find in the suttas that we cannot find in any book about Buddhism. No matter how good it is, it can never capture that moment when the Buddha is speaking with somebody. So our topic, our course for this for a clock. I have to get that open. For a course for this, the topic is the topic of early Buddhist meditation. Now, in modern times, obviously meditation has once again become a central part of the way that we think about and practice Buddhism. That's of course not always the case. There are many kinds of Buddhism where meditation does not play a big role. When we practice the forms of meditation that we practiced in modern times, we are invariably practicing something that has drawn upon the teachings in the suttas. All of the modern ways that we meditate, or virtually all of them, have, certainly in the Theravada world, have come about from an encounter between Buddhists, practicing Buddhists, reading the suttas and wanting to learn how to apply them in their lives. Let me get an idea before we start. If I can I ask a few questions of the audience? Get a bit of feedback? Okay, first of all, how many people here have meditated? Done some meditation? At least a little bit of meditation. Okay, very good. So pretty much everyone's done some meditation. Okay, good. How many people here have learnt Mahasi Vipassana meditation? Okay, a few there, okay. How many people have learnt Goenka meditation? Few Goenka practitioners, good. How many people have learnt meditation from like the Thai forest tradition, from Ajahn Chah tradition and so on background? Okay. How many people, I'm trying to think more examples, how many people have learnt from meditation from a tradition outside of Theravada, maybe from Zen or Tibetan tradition? How many people have learnt from those background? So Tom and Ling, you learnt meditation through Foklang Shan, is that right? Through the prior to that as well. Okay. Okay, excellent. Okay, so all of these different kinds of meditation. So these are the kind of the main. Does anyone learn meditation any other way? No? Maybe you learnt like TM. Anyone learn TM? No? Anything else? Transcendental meditation, if anyone's wondering. From Western Buddhist lay teachers, yeah. So they tend to draw mostly from like the modern insight tradition as well. Yeah. Sorry, that's not supposed to be happening. I turned this off. Let me turn this off again. If that goes on, that goes off. Okay. All right. Okay. So now, when we look at those different meditation teachings, usually when we think about how we meditate, we usually don't really. Often people don't ask, where does this come from? Like, why are we practicing in this way? I find it odd actually, because we put a lot of time and effort to invest in our meditation practice, but we rarely ask, like, why am I practicing like this? We often practice just because, that's somebody who happened to teach that way. And we happen to be at the temple or the center. Someone's giving that meditation. Okay, I'll join in, I'll practice that way. Yeah. But why? Why do we practice in these ways and not other ways? Actually, all of these things have their own context and they have their own history. I'm not going to go into those things in too much detail. But generally speaking, for example, I'll just talk a little bit about the Thai forest tradition, because that's my background. Now, in Thailand, up until mid-19th century or so, there was meditation practiced in Thailand, but it was mostly not really what we would recognize as meditation. It was more like Tantra, like invocation of Buddhas, or invocation of Dhammas, or meditation states. You have like a tantric text called the Jina Panjara, where you like invoke the different Buddhas and you place the Buddhas on your shoulders and these kinds of things. You make a cage of the Buddhas around you. So it's like a tantric visualization meditation. And it's not really very closely related to anything we find in the suttas. So these kinds of things were practiced. Now, around mid-19th century, a number of prominent leading Thai monks became interested in returning to the suttas. And one of them was, of course, you may be familiar if you've ever seen the film, The King and I. Yes? Yul Yes? Okay. So that was King Mongkut. And he was a famous reform king in Thailand who spent time as a monk before he was a king. And he started introducing a number of reforms into how Buddhism was practiced. And the basis of these reforms was, of course, as always, going back to the suttas, going back to the Vinaya, and trying to revive what he saw as the authentic spirit of the Dhamma practice. And now he did that mainly in terms of like organizing Sangha and restoring the Vinaya practice in the Sangha. But there were also monks at the time who started picking up that approach and applying it in meditation as well. And these were the first generation of what we now know as the forest tradition. And the early monks in that tradition, Luang Pu Sao, Tanchan Man, and others who founded the approach to meditation that many of us are familiar with. Now, of course, they were drawing upon local traditions and things which they knew around them. I'm not saying that they just invented it all out of nothing, but they were influenced and reformed and changed. So instead of meditating in order to give some sort of psychic power to an amulet, or to meditate to win the lottery, which some monks in Thailand still do, then they will start to watch the breath. Yeah? Mindfulness of breathing meditation. Or they will contemplate the different parts of the body, body investigation, Kayanupassana meditation. Yeah? Or they will contemplate death, Maranasati. Yeah? Or they do all of these kinds of practices which we are familiar with from the suttas. And so then it's from there that, say, Ajahn Chah learnt his meditation, and from there it was passed down to the present day. So the point of view I'm trying to say here is that when we are talking about Buddhism, the Buddhist tradition, we're talking about early Buddhism and so on. It's not like we're the first people to have this idea. Right? This is what our tradition consists of, and it's always been that way. There's always been some of the tradition is passed down through the community, through the customs, through the rituals, through the sort of folk Buddhism, and then there are reformers and renewers who will go back to the text and revitalize it. And this is done. Every generation will do this in its own way. Okay, so one of the things about that, now to just come back again to think of that historical context. Think about how powerful that has been. Yeah, just to stop for a minute and think about it. Yeah, did Ajahn Chah ever think that when he started? Yeah? A monk from an obscure little village, right, called Ban Not in Isan. This is the middle of nowhere. I mean, if you think you know what nowhere is, you haven't been to northeast Thailand, right? It's really the middle of nowhere. And just this obscure little village, and this monk grew up there. And like so many, he just stayed in his local village temple, tried to learn a bit of Pali, tried to study suttas, and then after a while he felt this sense of restlessness after a few years, where he was like, he knew that there was more. Yeah? He knew that there was more. And so this is where he set out on his search. And he really didn't know what he was doing. Yeah? When he first started, he knew nothing. Yeah? And he made all of these really silly mistakes. First silly mistake that he made was that when he was interested in herbal medicines. Right? So he would mix up herbal medicines, and you have like a mortar and pestle for mixing this up. So when he left to go wandering, he thought that it was essential to have a mortar and pestle with him. after carrying it for a few miles down the road, he realized maybe it wasn't so essential after all, and then threw that away. So he was learning as he went. Yeah? He didn't start out as a great master. Yeah? He started out as just an ordinary person who just wanted to practice the Dhamma. But how powerful that became, how many people that has influenced, yeah? How many people's lives have been changed by the actions of that one simple monk. Yeah? Of course, in the case of the Buddha, is even more so. Yeah? 2,500 years ago, and how many people's lives have been changed and are still being changed today? How many people every day their life is uplifted by their encounter with the Dhamma? Yeah? This is something which is incredibly powerful. And so when we are practicing, studying and learning, we are tapping into the power of that Dhamma. And this is something that helps us to uplift us. We're not alone in what we're doing. All right, for the next session, I'm going to briefly lay out the scope of what we are talking about when we are talking about early Buddhism. So the study of early Buddhism is mainly focused on the study of the Pali suttas, Pali Nikayas, and to a certain extent the Vinaya and the parallels to that literature, which is found in Chinese, Tibetan and Sanskrit, mostly in Chinese with smaller portions in Tibetan and Sanskrit. So I'll give it just, I know most of you probably have some background in this, but so I'm just going to give a brief overview as to what we're talking about when we are talking about the Pali Canon. Why don't I show sort of central to do this? Let's see if this works. Okay. Okay, so sort of central, we have early Buddhist texts. So we have the Tripitaka, the three baskets. Tripitaka is an interesting word, actually, because it means the three baskets. Okay, and it would seem obvious that what it means is that these were like baskets that you put books in, right? Like a bookcase. But the problem is that they were all oral texts at the time. So they must have been metaphorical baskets. Actually, yeah, anyway, well, moving on. So as we can see, we have what we call the Tripitaka, the three baskets, the suttas, Vinaya Pitaka and Abhidhamma Pitaka. So now, when we talk about early Buddhism and so on, that means it's a bit of a loosely defined term, right? It's not going to mean the same thing to everybody. But generally speaking, we're talking about those texts and teachings which were given by the historical Buddha in his lifetime, as well as those that are shortly afterwards. So there are some by the Buddha's disciples and some in that generation, the first maybe 100 or 200 years after the Buddha, leading up to the time of King Ashoka. Now, we can't always date all this material very accurately, but generally speaking, we have a good idea of the dates, the general dates of these texts. And so the part which is considered to be spoken by the Buddha is most of the discourses, part of the Vinaya, and the Abhidhamma was compiled later. Let's have a look at the discourses, and of course we have the long discourses, Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, the Samyutta, connected discourses or linked discourses, numbered discourses, and then various other collections. We have the Khuddaka Nikaya in Pali, and then various other miscellaneous things. So I'll just have a look at the Khuddaka Nikaya briefly. So this is the so-called Fifth Nikaya, and the Fifth Nikaya includes a large list of books. Some of the and the books are of various dates. Okay, so the last one we have down here, the Questions of King Milinda. This was composed after the time of King Milinda or King Menanda, who was a Greek king of about, I think, 100 BC or something like that. So this book obviously couldn't have been written before that, and it was developed sometime. So within the Khuddaka Nikaya, we have books that go up to maybe 400 years after the Buddha, roughly speaking. Okay, so when we're concerned with the early Buddhist texts, we're mostly concerned with those that are roughly contemporaneous with the four main Nikayas. Okay, and that is the 6 main books: the Dhammapada, the Udana Itivuttaka, Sutta Nipata, and the Theravada and Theravada. Okay, so these are texts that are, again, mostly derived from the time of the Buddha or shortly afterwards, and are mostly either spoken by the Buddha or by the disciples, especially in the case of the Thera and Theravada. And most of the later books, of course, it's always possible that there are early passages and so on included in later works, and we know that that happens in some cases. But generally speaking, these are the texts that are regarded as being the earliest. And I'll talk about why that is so briefly in a minute, but I'll just look at what the texts are. Then we have the Vinaya Pitaka, or as Venerable Brahmali translates it, the basket of monastic law. Now, we're not going to be dealing with the Vinaya very much on this course. But just to sort of briefly survey. So you can see, first of all, there are a lot of Vinayas. Oh my goodness, so many. And so many rules in all of them. So the Vinaya is the code of discipline for the monks and nuns. And we have some kind of hundreds of rules for monks and hundreds of rules for nuns. And basically, okay, so the difference here is this. With the suttas, okay, we have the suttas from some different traditions, but basically the different schools of Buddhism didn't really have different sutta collections as such. I mean, they did to some degree, but they were basically just different ways of compiling it. But the Vinayas were compiled per school. So each school of Buddhism had its own Vinaya, which would describe the conduct within that particular school of Buddhism. Now, again, mostly they're the same, right? So mostly the rules in the different Vinayas are all the same, okay? And certainly all of the major rules are all pretty much the same. But when it comes to some of the minor rules of conduct and procedures and things like that, then they can vary to some degree as well. Now, most of these, many Vinayas are in Chinese, so these were translated into Chinese. In some cases, I think if I remember correctly, the Mahishasaka Vinaya was taken from Sri Lanka and translated by Farsian in China. I'd have to look up the details, but anyway, so they were brought from India or Sri Lanka to China, and there they were translated. In other cases, we have some Sanskrit texts which were recovered. For example, let's have a look here. So, no, we don't have any Sanskrit text there. Spacing. Okay, it's just an example. So here's a Sanskrit Vinaya text. This is, in fact, hybrid Sanskrit text of the Theravada school. And this one was recovered, if I remember correctly, from Tibet. Doesn't say there. I think it was recovered from Tibet. So there's no living traditions of Buddhism that maintain their scriptures in Sanskrit, but there are a fair number of texts that have been recovered either from monasteries in Nepal and Tibet, sometimes from Dunhuang, which was like a cave that was discovered in the Central Asian desert that had thousands of manuscripts in it, or just occasional finds here and there. So these bits have been pieced together, and then modern editors have reconstructed the texts from the manuscript finds. Now, mostly because, of course, we're talking about meditation on this course, we're not focusing on the Vinaya, but I just wanted to give just a general view of what the Vinaya is. And similarly with the Abhidhamma, just do the same thing. Again, we're not mostly focusing on the Abhidhamma, but again, there are a few canonical texts of the Abhidhamma apart from the Pali. So in Pali, we have 7 major books of the Abhidhamma, and there are one main book in Dharmaguptaka in Chinese translation, and a few of the Sarvastivadin texts also available. And so the Abhidhamma texts are something like almost like a Dhamma textbook or curriculum or something like that. So they would have been compiled in different monasteries and different schools as a way of systematizing and explaining the Dhamma. Because as you know, in the suttas we have so many different things, different teachings here and there, so we have to have a way of presenting them. Okay, so this is just an example, randomly chosen example. This is a Dharma Skanda from the Sanskrit. This one is from Gilgit. So this is one of the Gilgit manuscripts. Again, a manuscript recovered from Central Asia, put together by some very clever people. Interesting to see. So this is done by German and Japanese scholars. And these look like Indian scholars as well. Yeah, published in New Delhi. So, this is really kind of an international work to take these manuscripts, which are very broken and scattered and so on, and then editing them so we can read them. So this is the Dharmaskanda, which is a book on the Abhidhamma, and you can see here it begins with the dependent origination, avidya prachaya samskara, sammoha pramoho mohang mohajang yang ujati avidya. So avidya is whatever is confusion, delusion, and so on. Avidya pachaya sankara, what is that? And that this was spoken by the Buddha, and so on. So you can see this is just an explanation for dependent origination and an analysis of the factors there. And you can see that basically the teaching here, even though the text is a bit different from what you find in Pali, but the teachings here is all basically the same. So for example here, anenja sanskara katama, so what are the imperturbable choices or sankaras, volitional activities, yeah? What are they? This is a phrase which we find in the suttas, but the suttas don't really explain them. Okay, the sutta refers to anenja sanskara. Here we find in the Abhidhamma, what is that? It is the four formless attainments. This is what is called the imperturbable. Okay, actually it's the same in the Pali tradition, right? That the imperturbable is described as the four formless attainments. So even just a small little detail like that we find is often just exactly the same. Okay, so again, this is just briefly to overview the Vinaya and the Abhidhamma. Mostly we are going to be focusing on the suttas. And let's have a brief look at a random sutta, and I'm sure again most of you are familiar with these to some degree. We'll look in the Samyutta Nikaya, and we will look at I'm just wondering whether I should be naughty or good. What should I be, naughty or should I be good? This is the question. Should I be naughty or should I be good? I should be good. Any other opinions? Sorry? You completely disagree. You think I should be naughty? Yeah. Yes. I won't be naughty. Let's just have a look at random sutta. This is Sutta Mara. Okay, and so it's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, and as always, at least in theory, the sutta begins evam me sutang, so I have heard. At one time the Buddha was first awakened, so this is giving us a setting for the sutta, ekang samayang. Unfortunately, the suttas don't give us a date, all right? So they tell us at one time, okay, good, but what time? We don't know, yeah? The Buddha was staying near Uruvela, so it does tell us the place, so this is good, yeah? And what we can do is we can actually go there, right? We can go to Uruvela on the banks of the Narandjara River. Who has been there? Anyone's been to Bodh Gaya? Yes? Tom and Lim. Really? Neil Lushi's been. Anyone else been to Bodh Gaya? Jagat, you've never been to Bodh Gaya? No. Oh, you must go. Okay. Once in your lifetime, you should make sure you get there. Anyway, so the Buddha was staying near Uruvela on the root of the goathead's banyan tree on the banks of the Naranjara River. This is how we know that these are real things, right? It's not talking about, the Buddha's not a fantasy figure. He's not just made up. He's not just a legend. He's sitting there on the banks of a river, yeah, doing some meditation. This is who he is. Then he was in private retreat. This thought came to his mind, I'm truly freed from that grueling work. Thank goodness I'm freed from that pointless, grueling work. Thank goodness that steadfast and mindful I have attained awakening. So Giovanni, this one is for you. Where's Giovanni? Oh, there you go. Yeah, this one's for you. You can use this one as a reflection. All right. And so here the Buddha is celebrating his freedom, right, and his escape and release from suffering. Now, Mara then comes up and challenges him. Mara. We all know Mara. Mara, the wicked one. Mara is our good friend, right? Mara is always with us in our times of joy and our times of sadness. Mara is always there. Everybody else might abandon us, but Mara stays with us. Yeah. And so Mara comes up and addresses him and saying, you've departed from the practice of mortification by which humans purify themselves. Oh, well, so this is talking about the practice of self-mortification, Atthakilamattana yoga, which the Buddha, of course, was doing before he was enlightened. And the very first discourse, remember, Dveme bhikkhave antapabaditena nasevitapa. So the two extremes that one gone forth should not indulge in. What are they? Atthakilamattana yoga, self-torture, yeah, and self-indulgence, the two. So again, just stop it for a minute here. Step back a little bit from this text, what we're hearing. Actually, the Buddha here is expanding on, or this is reflecting on, the same teaching as the very first sentence of the first teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Yeah? Can you see that? The suttas are so integrated. Everything is reflecting on and drawing upon something else. Usually, of course, something within the Four Noble Truths, right? And that's the context for everything. And so here, even with such a little line, we have that context, we have that meaning. And so the Buddha's teaching it has this incredible degree of coherence to it. Yeah? Everything that he was speaking was coming from that same sense of wisdom. So he's freed from that pointless, grueling work. Let me just see. So sort of central, in case you're not familiar, you want to see information about the text, you can click that and we'll give you the information. Bingo. You want to see some different things, you can click that one, views. You want to see parallels, we can look at the parallels. We'll do that in a minute. Let's have a look at the views, and what I'm going to do is look at this side by side. Okay, so now I can see the Pali and the English side by side. All right. Free from this grueling work. So the Pali for grueling work, dukkara karika. Okay, dukkara karika. Okay. Mara says you've freed yourself from the tapo kamma, from the practice of mortification, the tapo kamma. Now, this being a topic of which I recently had some first-hand experience. As we were driving around in the north, up near Jaffna, and had the rather strange sight of various tapasis hanging by hooks through their skin off the front of trucks. I have never seen or even heard of this before. I know that people will hang themselves off hooks, but they have like poles and things, and they will actually just be swinging at the front of the truck, and the truck's driving along with this person suspended, like bouncing up and down on the thing with the hooks through their skin. Have anyone seen that before? You've seen that, yeah, the Sri Lankans have seen it. People are sitting there wondering if I'm joking. Ling's not quite sure if I'm serious or not. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Sorry?
So the term ruling word refers to practice.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, dukkharika, yeah. I just had to look it up. It's not like a standard term, but you can see from context that that's what it means, yeah. Yeah. So the Buddha was so grateful that he'd been freed from the obligation to do that kind of self-mortification. And I must say, I also feel very grateful that the Buddha told us that we don't have to do that kind of thing. I feel very happy that we are freed from that kind of grueling work. Okay, but Mara, of course, is there to challenge him. Good on you, Mara. And I just want to say a word in Mara's defense, right? I mean, he is there to challenge the Buddha. Good, right? If you're a spiritual teacher, okay, then you need people to challenge you. Okay? Now, maybe the Buddha didn't, okay? So the Buddha was pure, okay? But most of us, a little bit pure sometimes, a little bit not so pure other times, yeah? And so it's actually good to have somebody who's going to challenge you and who's going to ask the hard questions. So Mara asked the hard questions. Good on him. And Mara may not have been perfect. I'll be the first to admit that. But but he did admit when he was wrong. Yeah? When the Buddha refuted him, he admitted he was wrong, and then he went away, which already makes him better than 99% of people who are using social media. Right? They'll never admit that they're wrong. Yeah? So Mara, all things considered, Mara wasn't too bad. Okay, so here the Buddha then replying to Mara. Now I realize that it's pointless. All that mortification in search of immortality is as futile as oars and rudder on a dry land. Ethics, immersion, and wisdom at Sila Samadhi Panya. By developing this path to awakening, I attained ultimate purity. Your beaten terminator. So I translated Antaka as terminator. What can I say? It's very literal. That's what it literally means, terminator. And then Mara thinking, the Buddha knows me, miserable and sad. He vanished right there. Now, I'm just going to say a couple of things about the text while we're going on. Now, I mentioned before how the suttas come back, or this particular sutta comes back to those first lines in the Dhammacakkappavattana sutta. And here that's reinforced because it says anatta sanhita, not connected with the goal. All right? And that is exactly the same word, in fact, that's used in the Dhammacakkappavattana sutta to describe that self-mortification. Again, just pointing this out because I'm trying to, I just chose this sutta at random, okay? This is just a random sutta. But what I'm trying to show you is how to read the suttas, yeah? How we can understand these things. Listen to how the Buddha is speaking, how he's responding to things, yeah? Yang kinchi amarang tapang. This is a hard one to translate. Amarang tapang is a obscure word. I've translated it as mortification in search of immortality. Okay, amarang tapang being amara meaning undying. Yeah, tapas being mortification in search of immortality. Because some ascetics, this is what they did. They wanted to do these mortification so that their soul would become immortal and would live in eternal bliss. Yeah. But another translation, which may be correct, is that amara in this case means endless. Yeah, endless mortification. Yeah? So also could be correct, right? Because you're keeping on doing it and you never achieve your goal. Yeah? Okay, makes sense. So as a translator, now if you're reading this, you can read it and say, oh, this one seems reasonable and this one seems reasonable or whatever. But as a translator, I have to make a decision. This is the hard life of a translator, and you have to go one way or the other. So I said mortification in search of immortality. I could have said all that endless mortification. All right. So this is a short, fairly simple sutta, but already here we can see a number of the features that we find in the suttas. We see that we have a place, we have a setting, We see we have a dialogue. We can see that we have a... we can see, I think one important thing is here that we have like a culture of questioning and inquiry, right? Yeah. And look, here it's Mara doing the questioning, but you know, it wasn't just Mara. Obviously, throughout the suttas, many different kinds of people doing these questioning. Okay. All right. So this is one of the short suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya. All right. Actually, that's what I was going to do. 1 second. And back here, and keep going back. Okay. Getting rid. Oops. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly look here at the parallels. So again, on Sutta Central, we can always see the parallels through this button here. And in this particular case, this sutta has one parallel. Sometimes suttas will have many dozens of parallels. This particular one has one, and this is in the Chinese Samyutta Agama. So this was translated from probably Sanskrit to Chinese in around 440 or something CE. And it's of the Sarvastivadin or Mula-Sarvastivadin school. So for each of the suttas on Sutta Central, we will tell you which are the parallels that are available. This particular parallel, we we have a translation, but only in Vietnamese. Does anyone speak Vietnamese here? An. Okay, you're going to read this for us. Okay. So here is the same sutta in Vietnamese, and we're going to go through and see whether it's the same as it is in Pali. Okay. So this is the translation from Chinese to Vietnamese. So you've gone from Sanskrit to Chinese, Chinese to Vietnamese. Okay. It's a long journey. Okay. Thus have I heard. Is that what it says there? Yeah. At one time, the Buddha, Phat, yes, the Buddha was staying near Neranjara, near the river Uruvela, Wat Pela, right? Yeah. Then, see, I'm just making this up. See? Let's just transcribe. And at that time, he reflected, now I've done with all that hard work, something like that. Is that what it says? Yeah? Lante, what does that mean? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, very good. So it seems very similar. And then Mara comes up. Ma Bantuan. Right? Yeah? And challenges him. And we won't go through the rest of the sutta. But you can see that actually it's very similar, even through that lens of translation. Thanks to An for giving that. Very good job translating to Vietnamese. This is why it's very helpful to have a nice, diverse group of people, different backgrounds, because we have something to learn from everyone. Yep. Thank you for that. So this is enough to tell us that the sutta is very similar. Of course, we'd have to do a really close study if we wanted to look exactly which parts might be similar or different. But generally speaking, this is what we find. When we talk about the parallels to suttas, we find that they are mostly all the same. Usually all of the teaching content is the same. Occasionally some small differences. Sometimes the background story might be a bit different. Sometimes the circumstances might be changed a little bit. So they're not always identical, but generally speaking, they always are quite similar. And if you're on Sutta Central and you want to read the Chinese text, you can also use, we have a lookup to help you with that. So this is, you can click on there and then that will give you the Chinese text. So the first one, Ru Shi Wo Wen, thus have I heard. Yi Xu, Fo Zai, and this one is not bringing up. Anyway, so this is a tool that we give to help you read the Chinese on Sutta Central. All right. Any questions on that so far? Yes, the Chinese is a form of classical Chinese, yes. So it's not very similar to modern Chinese. Usually, if someone is a Chinese speaker, they can make out most of the characters, but sometimes the meanings have changed, and there are a lot of course, very specialized words. But it's not classical Chinese in exactly the same sense as, like, say, Confucius and the other sort of classical Chinese in that way. In fact, Buddhist Chinese is almost a distinct dialect or even spectrum of dialects of Chinese of its own, because texts were translated into Chinese over a 1,000-year period, right? So there's a lot of diversity within that. And one of the things that the Chinese translators had to grapple with was the fact that Chinese is a language that's formed very differently than the Indic languages. So Indic languages are very highly, have a very complex morphology. They have the declension of the numbers and the plurals and all of these kinds of things, and Chinese has none of that. So the way that you express yourself in Chinese idiomatically is very different to how you'd express yourself idiomatically in an Indic language like Pali or Sanskrit. So the Chinese translators over many centuries had to develop a whole science of linguistics and translation to help to support that translation process. And obviously they learnt over quite a long period gradually how to do that. Yeah. So generally speaking, if someone knows modern Chinese, they wouldn't be able to pick up they'd struggle if they picked up a sutta and tried to read it, but it wouldn't take them that long to learn how to read it. Most of the characters are still similar, and it's a matter of just getting familiar with some of the idioms and so on. Yeah. Sorry, did someone else have another question? I thought someone else had another question just now. No. All right, very good. Okay, so far we've been looking at the textual basis of early Buddhism, okay? And I've been referring primarily to the Pali texts. Now, of course, there are all of these different scriptures. But of all of those scriptures, even though normally we can say that the Chinese texts were translated from a similar period and similar to what we find in the Pali, but for any detailed study of early Buddhism, the Pali scriptures will always be the primary source, okay? And that is for a number of reasons. Number one, because we have a complete set of scriptures in Pali. Other ones we have incomplete, some from different places and so on. So there's a lot of them, but not one complete collection from one school. Second one, obviously, it's from an early Indic language, right? So Pali is at least as early and probably somewhat earlier than any of the other languages that we find in ancient India, from Buddhist languages, earlier than Sanskrit, earlier than Gandhari, and so on. So we have it, we can read it in the original language, which obviously is much more precise than reading it in any translation. The third thing is that the Pali texts are extremely well edited. I don't know how I can emphasize this enough, but if you read the Sanskrit text comparing to the Pali, it's just such a mess. Right? It's so complicated and so difficult because they're just not edited as nice and cleanly. And partly that's because they've been maintained by a living tradition, but I think also it's because from the beginning, the Mahavihara and the Theravada tradition defined itself by its care and its precision in maintaining texts. And right from the beginning, even in the Deepa Wangsa, when one of the earliest discussions of the schism between the school, you have a discussion between the schism between the Theravada and the Mahasangika that occurred a few hundred years after the Buddha. And one of the things that the Theravadins criticized the Mahasangika for is that they were sloppy in maintaining their texts. They would mix up the nouns and pronouns and nominatives and accusatives. They get their plurals and singulars mixed up and so on. And so they took the Theravadan tradition from a very early time, took a pride in the clarity and precision with which they maintained their text. And you can see that. I mean, it's astonishing, really, for me. I work with these texts every day to see how precise and clean and consistent they are, that you can keep, a huge corpus of text from 2,500 years ago. So this is another reason why Pali will always be the primary source. Another reason is because we have the commentaries, okay? So our main focus here is on the canonical scriptures. But all of these canonical scriptures, of course, over years will accumulate commentary, okay? Now, I'm doing that now. I'm making a commentary, right? And everyone does that. Everyone who talks about the suttas, we have commentaries. And so the commentaries in the Pali are invaluable because we have a detailed commentary on every sutta. And it will explain the words used in the suttas, the meanings, the context, and the background. And all of that is just invaluable for any student of Pali to learn and to understand what even just the meaning. So many obscure things that you find referred to, right? A kind of bird or something like that, who was it? Bhante Sujato emailed me just before I came from Australia and was asking me this question about one of my translations in the Digha Nikaya. And I translated, there's a particular bird, and I translated it as a kookaburra. Now look, I know there are no kookaburras in ancient India that we know of, okay? So indulge me in this particular one. And he's saying, and so you have a look. Why is it that? Well, we don't really know what kind of bird it was, but it seems to have been maybe a bird that would eat fish, or crabs. I think crabs. It was named for something after crabs. Something that would eat crabs, and something that would make. It was in the context of a bird that would make a loud noise in the forest. So a kookaburra is a bird that eats crabs and makes a loud noise in the forest. So why not? Okay. So some of these things we don't know exactly the details, but my work, my translation, I always try to find out every tiny little detail. Yeah? And sometimes you can spend days just researching like one name or one word just to find out exactly what is going on with that particular context. So this is another area where the commentaries are very precise. And finally, another reason why the Pali texts are a prime source is because of the ancient Indic science of linguistics. And this is something that most people don't really understand. Like when I first encountered Buddhism, I heard people chanting Pali, okay? I was like 26. I'd never heard someone chanting Pali before. And they're in Thailand, and we had to take the precepts before our retreat. Right? So you go and you meet with the monk and they say, okay, now you have to bow to the monk. So you bow to the monk and they say what the monk says. And the monk goes, Namo tassa bhagavato. And then I try to imitate him and say what he's saying. I've got no idea what any of this is about. And it just sounds like they're just intoning this mantra. It sounds like it's just this meaningless bunch of words. I don't know what this is. And so we don't really realize that Pali is actually an extremely well-defined and well-described language. In fact, the ancient Indian science of linguistics was the most advanced science of linguistics ever developed, and was only ever, in the 20th century, we've only ever caught up with that. And even today, all of the teaching of Pali and Sanskrit and everything is basically just doing it exactly the same as it was in those days, but we just organize it for learning. But the understanding of the linguistics is exactly the same as you find from Panini, from the very earliest Indian grammar, Ashtadhyayi. And when we look into Panini is incredible. Like I don't even begin to understand what Panini was doing. But it is such he's using all of these abstract forms and variables and like algebra, so he's like substituting things in stems and all of these very, very sophisticated techniques. And he only lived like within a century after the Buddha. Yeah? He's basically a contemporary with the Buddha. And they're using this incredibly sophisticated science of linguistics. Now, this, of course, was developed by the Brahmins for their understanding of their Vedas. And the Buddhists, of course, learnt it from them. You know, many of the Buddhists were Brahmins. They'd already learnt those things. And so what that means is that very, very sophisticated understanding of language and how it works was there right from the beginning. It's not something that was learned over time. Right from the beginning, all of those things were known with very, very detailed clarity. So again, this is another one of the reasons why that tradition has been maintained so well over the years. So for this course, my expertise is mostly in Pali, and I'll be referring mostly to the Pali texts. But I'll glance from time to time at some of the Chinese and Sanskrit texts, hopefully, the area of exploring those different texts and parallels is an ongoing field of research. So my friend Venerable Analio has obviously done astonishing work in that field, as has Rod Bucknell, who's one of the founders of Sutta Central. And so there is so much more that needs to be done in that kind of area. But generally speaking, what we will find when we research in the Chinese and Tibetan and Sanskrit early suttas, we will find that they say mostly the same thing as the suttas do. Yeah? And one of our friends in Sydney is Professor Mark Allen, and he works with the Gandhari manuscripts. And so Gandhari manuscripts are an exceptionally difficult field of research because the manuscripts themselves are the oldest Indic manuscripts. They're nearly 2,000 years old. The manuscripts are very fragmentary, often just scraps, and sometimes there might be just a letter on the one scrap. And you've got to figure out where does it go. And so then the Gandhari language is also completely unknown. Until they discovered these manuscripts, they had to reconstruct the language and the script, which itself is evolving and changing, because it's yet. So you're having to reconstruct all of this as you go, and then you put it together and piece little bit by little bit these texts together. And it takes years of work, and at the end of the day, then you say, oh, actually, it's pretty much the same as this sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. Yeah. So I am very glad that scholars like Mark have the patience to do that work. Yeah? And it's astonishing work. But what it's doing is it's establishing that history. It's establishing the facts. Because we can believe that these Pali suttas are the teachings of the Buddha. But why? How do we know that? Well, we know that because our tradition tells us things, okay. But traditions sometimes say things that are right and sometimes say things that are wrong. Yeah, we know that. The sutta says that. It says exactly that, right? Just because something's passed down in the tradition, maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. How do we know? So the Buddha taught us to investigate and inquire. Yeah? To investigate and inquire. Now, sometimes we can do that investigation and inquiry through through reflecting within the Pali texts themselves, right? So we do our analysis and text criticism within that sphere. Sometimes we can do it by comparing with Chinese and other texts, Sanskrit and Tibetan. Sometimes we can also do it with reference to archaeology. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And sometimes we can do it in reference to history as well. So we have many different dimensions and many different perspectives from which to bring onto the suttas and into understanding the suttas. Now, a few years ago, myself and Venerable Brahmali did a book on this topic called The Authenticity of the Early Buddhist Texts. And one of the, what we did with that book is we brought together a whole range of different perspectives and points of view as to why we take these texts seriously as being the words of the Buddha. And and the reason that we did this was that we had found that there were many different kind of arguments and points of view which had been made over the years, but nobody had actually brought them all into one place. And on the other hand, there are also who are very skeptical, right? And it's very popular, and especially, I have to say, it's very popular in modern American academic circles. American academic Buddhist studies has largely rejected the idea of even studying Buddhism, to be honest. They're certainly not studying Buddhist texts or the teachings of the Buddha or anything like that. Not everyone, obviously, but a large, the majority, we find that there's no real consideration of the early texts, and they do this because they don't think that they are authentic, they don't think that they're real. So this was one of the reasons why Brahmali and I put together this book, because we wanted to counter this argument. We don't think that the argument is cogent. And when we were doing this, we found a number of interesting things which reflected to me about why we consider these texts to be early. One of the details that we found was a detail from archaeology. Now, recently, or just a few days ago, we've been travelling around Sri Lanka, and we've had the very wonderful opportunity to go and visit some archaeological sites. And of course, Sri Lanka has an abundance of ancient sites, some of which are very well known, like Anuradhapura, we'll be going after the course, and others which are yet to be discovered, and some which are in the process of being discovered. And so we went to one of those in northern Sri Lanka. It was an ancient stupa and monastery complex, and just being excavated by the archaeology department, with Jagat here being one of the main people behind it. And they are discovering something about the history of the region, about how the monks lived, and you see like the different areas where they would have the stupa and the uposatagara where they would recite the patimokkha, and so you're beginning to get a perception of how things were. Now, unfortunately, we don't have anything like that for the Buddha's day. Yeah? There's no real archaeology of that kind of archaeology from the time of the Buddha. We don't have any monasteries from that day. We don't have any monastic complexes. From a little bit afterwards, we do. From the time of Ashoka, yes, have Ashokan pillars. We have stupas. We have quite a lot from that time. But from the Buddha's time, we don't have anything. Why is that? Probably because much of the time the things were more low-key in the time of the Buddha, right? Most of the kutis may be just wood or bamboo or something, maybe, to some degree. Sometimes also just, again, as we discovered, archaeology is hard work, right? Not just physically hard work, but also politically hard work, yeah? One of the major Buddhist sites in ancient India, of course, is modern-day Patna. Yeah? It's a huge city. Yeah? Can you imagine how much archaeology there is underneath Patna? Yeah, that was the Ashoka city of Pataliputta. And in the whole of Patna, there's not been a single properly done archaeological study. Yeah? So there's so much which has just not been done. So anyway, we don't have very much archaeology from the time of the Buddha, but we do have some things. And the one thing that we do have, which is more important, I think, than anything else, is we have northern black polished ware. Northern black polished ware. It's a kind of pottery. And it is black and shiny. A little bit like a monk's bowl. Yeah? And in fact, I think that's what, when they're talking in the Vinaya about the monks making their bowls being black and shiny, that's what they were referring to. It's the same thing you can read about in the Vinaya as you can actually dig out of the soil. And the interesting thing is that they have found northern black polished ware in all of the same places that it talks about in the suttas. And the suttas in the Vinaya, all across the Ganges Plain in northern India. So this was a cultural region, yeah, where they were exchanging, people were moving across and they were trading, and northern black polished ware at the time was an expensive product. Yeah, it's high quality, and it took. It was like a glazing process that you had to fire it to a very high temperature, right? So that means you had to have that technology to be able to control fire and to be able to create that beautiful pottery. And so this is one of the defining technologies of that cultural region that was there at the time of the Buddha. You can even see that in the suttas when Venerable Nanda was gifted or was carrying, and he was looking very schmick as a monk. He had makeup on, he had pressed and ironed robes to make himself look nice, and was carrying a nice shiny black bowl. Yeah, so this would have been the northern black polished ware. Yeah, so this would have been the shiny stuff that you could have as a monk. So on the one hand, it's only a few bits of pottery, yeah? But on the other hand, it tells us that cultural region that the Buddha was living in, that those stories are actually relating to some material thing. So it's one of the things that my friend Brahmali pointed out. He said that he said that even if you notice, like one of the things that you find in societies is that they will import and export their luxury goods, right? Usually like that. Yeah? Usually if you're in Sri Lanka, you will import luxury goods from Australia, like Maggi noodles. And if we're in Australia, we'll import Dilma tea from Sri Lanka. So I don't know if that always applies, but anyway. So, but in the time of the Buddha, like the fine material was from Kasi, from Benares. They were like, oh, that's really nice cloth. You cook it all the way from Benares, yeah. And so this region was the region that they were in. Now that changed very soon afterwards. Within 100 years, Alexander the Great was invading India. Yeah? 100 years later. And the whole of India had been unified under the Mauryan Empire. Yeah? And they had massive trade routes opened up with Greece and Rome. Yeah? And down to Sri Lanka. So from the Buddha's day, you had that region that was just northern India. Then within 100 years later, that region had grown to cover much of the world. And then another 100 or 200 years after that, also to China. Yeah? So that world had changed. Yeah? That world had changed. I like to think, and I can't prove this historically, but I like to think that Buddhism played a role in that. Actually, if you look in all of those places, you always see that the Buddhists were following the trade routes through all of those different regions. And Buddhism has formed a unifying force throughout Asia since that time. And I think that one of the things that Buddhism brought was an ethic and a value that respected all people from all different places. It was not a religion that was based on me and my tribe and my locality. It was based on humanity. And so I think that was one of the things that was really favourable to that spread and that connection and that growing of those international connections. Anyway, that's just my speculation on that. So what I've been talking about a little bit this morning is about the textual scope of early Buddhism within the Tipitaka, and especially for the meditation teachings focusing on the suttas. I've been talked a little bit about the connection between the Pali suttas and the parallels in Chinese, Sanskrit and Tibetan. And I've talked a little bit about the archaeology and the connections at the time, about the cultural region that Buddhism came up in, and about how that is reflected in the suttas and the scriptures that we have. Now, when we receive these suttas, let's assume that we're correct. Okay, let's assume that these are suttas from 2,500 years ago, that they're mostly spoken by the Buddha. Let's assume that they are teaching the path to enlightenment. Okay, let's just assume that for the moment. Well, what does that mean for us? I mean, there was a spiritual teacher 2,500 years ago, so what? Right? Why does that have to do with anything that we're doing here? Huh? So this is a question which we can't answer by studying texts. It's a question that I cannot tell you. I can make some suggestions, I can maybe make some hints, but that's something that you are going to have to figure out for yourself, because what these things mean is different for each one of us. Yeah? Now, notice the funny way that time works. You see, I'm here talking about early Buddhism, but what I'm saying is not early Buddhism. What I'm saying is, in fact, the very latest form of Buddhism that exists, because it's right now. So if the suttas are early Buddhism, what I'm saying about the suttas, this is the latest Buddhism there is. Yeah? It's really important to remember this. Yeah? We are engaging in that process which is evolving and changing over time. Yeah? And we are doing that just as every generation of Buddhists has before us. Yeah? This is simple. It's not that hard, actually. We just want to know what the Buddha's teachings are, and we want to apply them in our life to overcome suffering. Yeah? That's the question. That's the question that we have as Buddhist and Buddhist practitioners. And so the means that we can do that will change. We can do it on a website now. Yes? Makes it much easier. We can do it here at Nagananda University. We couldn't do this a few years ago because it didn't exist. So the way that we do these things can change, but that fundamental question will always remain the same. What was the Buddha's teaching, and how can we apply that to overcome the suffering and find freedom from suffering in our lives? It's important when we're studying early Buddhism that just because something is early doesn't mean it's good. Because something's old doesn't mean it's better. It just means that it's old. And it can be sometimes you find a tendency in students of early Buddhism that people will think, that they were, this is the real Buddhism, this is better, or something like that. We shouldn't think like that. It's not a wholesome way to think. Okay? Actually, there are valuable and beautiful things to be found in every form of Buddhism and in all of the expressions of the way that people practice the Dhamma. Just a couple of days ago, we were down at Kataragama, and we went and we made a offering of puja to the stupa there and to the Bodhi tree. And it was beautiful. And you see all of these families coming along, and people were doing the drumming, and people were doing the dancing and things like that. Well, the suttas don't say to do that, okay? The suttas do have something. They did celebrate the Buddha's passing away with singing and dancing. This is true. So there are elements. They did offer puja, so there are elements of that. But that practice is a cultural practice. Yeah, it's not exactly what's found in the suttas, but it wasn't harmful. Nobody was doing anything unwholesome. People were coming there with their families, and they were celebrating, and they were finding joy and uplifting themselves through those simple acts that they could do together as a family. Yeah? Now, I'm not going to sit here as a monk and say to them, no, you take your 12-year-old daughter and you teach her the Brahmajala Sutta, because that's going to be better, People will come to things in their own time. Yeah? And this is why we have to approach our traditions with a generosity of spirit. Yeah? And all of the traditions have something in them that's valuable. And they will all transmit something of the Dhamma which cannot be captured in the texts. You can't capture everything in the texts. Yeah? And especially like when I see in a Buddhist culture and Buddhist tradition, I see something of like the manner in which people do things, like a gentleness that people bring to things, yeah? A respectfulness and a humility that people bring to doing things. And this is something that you can see with people and how they are and how they relate with each other, but you can't really sort of get that from a text. Yeah? So I think I just want to make this kind of reminder that yes, this is our main focus, to study what it says in the suttas and to talk about how it applies to meditation. But this is only a part okay? It's not the whole thing. I'm not saying this is the whole thing. I'm saying this is something I'm interested in, and maybe you'll find something valuable in it. That's all. All right? Okay, very good. So I think we now have reached the end of that first session. Are there any questions before we finish up for the first session? I think we break for morning tea, right? Yeah. Tom?
Whereabouts was the most complete collection of the Pali Canon found?
Interesting question. So I'll just repeat it for the camera. But Tom asked whereabouts was the most complete collection of the Pali Canon found. In fact, if we look at the manuscript traditions, it's rare, if not impossible, to find a complete collection of manuscripts in any one monastery. So typically monasteries will have a selection of different manuscripts, and some, especially the more obscure books, can be very difficult to find. So the collections that we have them today were generally speaking compiled from various sources. Now we actually spoke with somebody in the Cultural Affairs Department a couple of years ago, and they had done research on the manuscripts of the Tripitaka in Sri Lanka, and they had yet to find any monastery in Sri Lanka that had a complete set of manuscripts. Okay? Not to say that one doesn't exist, but they had not found it. They had found one that was almost complete. It was missing a couple of the books in the Khuddaka Nikaya. But generally speaking, so the different books are in different places, and they were compiled and put together in modern times. So the version that's been mostly used by international scholars has been the Pali Text Society version, and that was compiled mostly from a random assortment of manuscripts that just happened to be available to the scholars who did the work. Okay, that was the process. Okay, I know a professor in France, and he got hold of a copy of this manuscript when he was in Burma, and so I'll see if I can borrow that, and I'll use that one. That's more or less the process. There's a slightly more systematic process that went on in the 20th century with the compilation of the Sixth Council. So the Sixth Council was held in the 1950s, and there they recited all the texts, and they produced complete editions of the canon from there. So most of the ones that we use on Sutta Central and other for practical purposes these days will come from that Sixth Council, and they did that work at the council of bringing together the work of from the different places and compiling it there. So since that time, that's been our main source. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yes, Ling. Nanda, not Ananda.
Oh, Nanda, yeah. Was it a joke or was it?
No. He just wanted to look good.
Oh, okay. And what did the Buddha say?
The Buddha said, "Don't do it." Okay, so thanks everybody. Let's wrap up, and we'll be back here about 10 o'clock. So everybody else, we all did our introductions yesterday, so you missed out. Sorry about that. But you're most welcome. Okay. Right. So this morning we covered a few. So for today we're doing. Today we're doing the background and introduction to things. Do we have that? No? Let me see, we don't seem to have the screen. Can we have the screen? That's probably got a timeout on it. Warming up. No? I had to wake up. Okay, it's a little bit sleepy. Has to wake up. Anyway, you have your sheets as well, so you should have these printed out. So I'm just going to read through a few suttas for this session and reflect on them briefly for giving some context to how we're going to be approaching the teaching. First one I'm looking at is Anguttara Nikaya number 5.202. Mendicants, there are these 5 benefits of listening to the teaching. What 5? You learn new things, clarify what you've learned, get over uncertainty, correct your views, and inspire confidence in your mind. These are the 5 benefits of listening to the teaching. So this is a very simple discourse, as you can see in the Anguttara Nikaya number 5s. And as I'm sure you're familiar, the Anguttara Nikaya collects the teachings according to numbered sets. So the 5s has the 5 things, in this case the 5 benefits of listening to the teaching. And so, as with everything that the Buddha does, okay, when you pay close attention to it, then you realize how much wisdom and subtlety there is to what he is saying. Okay? 5 benefits of listening. Number 1, you learn new things. Okay? That's pretty good. Yeah? That's pretty good. And very often, if we're learning or educating, that's all that we do, actually. That's the first thing that you want to do. I want to learn something new, and that's all that there is to it. Oh, now I've learned that thing. Yeah? But this is only the start for the way that the Buddha wanted to do things. Second thing is that you clarify what you've learned. Learning is not a unitary or singular thing. It's a process. You learn a little bit, and then you learn a little bit more, and then you learn a little bit more, and you go over it and over it and over it again. And that's especially true with religious learning and spiritual learning. Yeah? In a way, the Buddha just kept on repeating the Four Noble Truths from the time he was enlightened until the time he died. And he kept on drawing out different implications to those Four Noble Truths. Most of us, I'm sure, just about all of us, have heard the Buddha's first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, teaching the Four Noble Truths. Yeah? And when Anya Kondanya heard that, he became a stream enterer. I'm going to just make a guess here, just a stab in the dark, that most of you didn't become a stream enterer when you heard that sutta. Yes? Just a guess. Why is that? Yeah? Why is that? Because to learn new things is only part of it. Yeah? That's only part of the process. Actually, there's so much more to it in terms of who we are as students, what is our karma, how ready are we for the teaching, how much wisdom do we have, but also for the teacher, the presence, the situation, the time, the place. Yeah? All of those things add up, and that's what gives the teaching some power. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a Buddha who is here today. And the Buddha could speak to you and he would know exactly what is the right teaching for you at this time and this place. Yeah? This is handy. Yeah? The Buddha's kind of like Google except wise. And he will give you the information that you need when you need it. Yeah? But now we're not so lucky. So we need to do a bit more broad looking at the suttas and broad looking at the teachings so that we can learn when we are ready what is going to matter. So to learn new things, to clarify what you've learned, which is what we're doing through questioning and so on, to get over uncertainty, kankang vitarati. Yeah? Doubting is natural. Doubting is a normal part of the path. Yeah? Remember when the Buddha visited the Kalamas and the Kalamas told him, we have so many doubts. Some teachers teach this, some teachers teach that. We don't know what to believe. And the Buddha said, You're doubting about a doubtful matter. He didn't say to them, you shouldn't doubt. He didn't say to them, I'm right and they're wrong. Yeah? He said, yes, it's a doubtful matter. It's reasonable to feel doubt in that situation. Yeah? Here's how you can find out the truth for yourself. Yeah? This is how we overcome doubts. This is a point which is very, very important and quite a subtle one. If we think about it, we think, what is that which overcomes doubt? What is the opposite of doubt? Yeah? Now, the obvious answer is faith. Yeah? Faith helps overcome doubt, and that's true. But it's interesting that when the Buddha answered that question in the suttas, what he said was, thank you so very much. Excellent. Good, now we're all here. So the Buddha said that inquiry is what overcomes doubt. Yeah? Inquiry, not faith. Not to say that faith doesn't help as well, but inquiry. You have to learn to find the answers for yourselves. Yeah? So the role of a teacher is to guide you and to help you, but you need to find that answer. This is actually psychologically very acute. There's so many things that we find in the suttas that you can just pass over or not really notice, but they're all of them, when you look closely, they are psychologically so precise. Why is this one psychologically so precise? Because when you are looking for an answer to something, okay, there are two different pathways in your brain, two different neurological pathways which are used if somebody gives you an answer compared to if you find the answer for yourself. Yeah? They're quite different kinds of things. Yeah? If somebody tells you the answer, then it doesn't sink so deeply. If you find the answer for yourself, yeah, yes, you understand it. That meaning is much deeper. It's a psychological reality. So this is why it's important when we're teaching the Dhamma. Yes, to some extent we have to have a teacher to explain things and to tell things for us. But it's not the job of a teacher to tell you everything. Sometimes the Buddha would give a short teaching and then just get up and walk out and leave everybody to go, what's going on? Yeah? Someday I hope to have enough guts to be able to do that. Maybe on this course I'll do that. I'll come along, say a sentence, and then just get up and leave. And then you can all figure it out for yourself. Yeah? Because the Buddha knew that we have to inquire, and we're only going to overcome our doubts through a process of inquiry. All right? So when you feel those doubts, good. Doubts are okay. Yeah? Keep on looking. Keep on inquiring. Ditthing ujjung karoti. Yeah? So this is to correct your views. Yeah? So there are some cases where maybe we have the wrong view about things. Yeah? Maybe you have an incorrect idea. And we can listen to the teachings, and someone teaching, and that can point out to us where we've made a mistake. This also is a very important and very psychologically acute thing that the Buddha is saying here. Too often, when we listen to teachings, what we really want is for somebody to tell us that we were right all along. We want someone to tell us that, yes, to affirm us, to affirm our views, to affirm our ideas, yeah? Because it makes us feel nice. This is what I believe. And now I have this respected teacher. He's telling me that I was right all along. Yeah? And you're sitting there, and what that teacher is teaching, letting go. And what you're having in your mind is holding on. Can you see this? The teacher's saying, yes, you should let go. And you're thinking, yes, I also believe we should let go. I. Yeah? Actually, it's just affirming your ego. So this is why it's really important for a teacher to challenge your views, to help you to see things differently, to realize that sometimes you make mistakes. Yeah? Not everything and not all the time, but from time to time. Yeah? So when you're listening to a teacher and the teacher's making you feel uncomfortable, that's when you need to stay. Yeah? Oh, what's going on here? Why am I rejecting this? No, that can't be right. But is it? No? Oh, I'm not sure. Yeah? And that is that state where wisdom can start to arise. Yeah? There's an interesting trope in the suttas where some of the monks would sometimes be wandering into town for alms, and they would wander off course to go to visit an ashram and ask about, engage with or have a discussion with the various ascetics or wanderers who are staying at that place. And sometimes what would happen is that they would teach something, the wanderers would teach something, and then the bhikkhus would go, well, without accepting or rejecting it, we will bear it in mind and we will go and ask the Buddha about it. Yeah? And that state of mind of neither accepting nor rejecting, yeah? Yeah? But to bear it in mind, that period of suspension of things. This is an essential quality to learn. Yeah? That's interesting. Yeah? And to inquire, to find out, is that right? Is that not right? Yeah? And it's a sign of insecurity and a sign of a weakly developed sense of confidence that you need to be right all the time and that you need to have an answer all the time. Yeah? So watch yourself and watch your reactivity. Somebody says something, you don't agree with it, and you react against it all the time. Yeah? Then this is a sign of like an inner insecurity. I'm not saying that that's the case every time, right? Sometimes it's okay. But if you find yourself doing that all the time, yeah? Always just reacting, always going against someone, then you need to reflect. Actually, part of our spiritual practice means to learn when did we make a mistake. Yeah? Dirting udung karoti, chittamasa pasidati. Yeah? To make yourself happy. So this word pasidati has a kind of a twofold meaning. It both means like clarity and happiness, but also means confidence, yeah? And trust. So when you're listening to the teaching taught well, then it will make you feel good, yeah? It will make you happy, and it will also give you that sense of confidence. So this is 5 benefits of listening to the teaching. Okay? I'm going to go on to another sutta in a minute. Are there any questions on this one before we go on? Okay, so where are we now? Sankitta Sutta. One time the Buddha was staying near... by the way, let me just return to the previous sutta. And so I'm not going to do this every time, but let me just give you, again, a bit of an introduction to what we're doing here with these texts on Sutta Central. So you can see we have the Pali and the English side by side, so that's nice. You can see we have some variant readings here for the Pali. So you can see there's a bit of a spelling difference. The BJ is the Buddha Jayanti Tripitaka. So some words spelt slightly differently. So this can give us that information about variant readings. This one is an interesting variant reading because it's not just a different spelling, but it's actually a different word. So the reading accepted in this text, this is the Burmese reading, is vitarati, kankang vitarati, meaning to get over certainty or get past certainty. And in the Thai, Cambodian, Pali Text Society, and an old Burmese edition, they have vihanati, which means to destroy your doubt. Yeah? So either to get over doubt or to destroy the doubt. Actually, a different word in this case. Okay. The other thing we can do with sort of central, we can do different kinds of views. And another thing which you might not know about, which is cool, is we can change the script. So we have it now here in the Latin script. We can see it in the Avestan script. This is the script of the Zoroastrians. So if you're any Zoroastrians, you can read it. In Bangladesh, what script do you use for Pali? In Bangladesh? Bengali? Bengali, where are we down here? Here we go, Bengali. Okay? Yeah, okay. So it's now in Bengali. And we can also do, so I'm just showing off here. We can also do Sinhala. We're in Sri Lanka, so we should do Sinhala. There we go. And while we're at it, we can do all of these obscure things. We can do Urdu if we want to. Isn't that nice? Wow. That's very nice. Okay, so what we're doing here, we rely on a utility called Aksharamukha, which was built by this mad genius who has written this thing that can convert Pali and Sanskrit to all of these different languages. Different scripts. These are not different languages, these are different scripts. The earliest script, of course, is Brahmi. And there is a text in Brahmi. And you'll find Brahmi used a lot in Sri Lanka on the archaeological sites, especially the old archaeological sites. And they all use Brahmi. This is taken from the Ashokan scriptures. And this is the earliest language that Pali was written down in. Yeah? So the reason that we can do this is because the ancient Indian scripts are all phonetic. And that means that there is a one-to-one relationship with the sounds in the different scripts. So each script is writing the same thing, but just using a different way of spelling it, that's all. So these are not translations. This is all Pali, but just written in different scripts, okay? Sometimes people ask me, they say, oh, Bhante, I want this phrase in Pali. So I send them this phrase in Pali. They say, no, but I want it in the real Pali. And they say, why? Usually, because they want a tattoo. They want to get a tattoo, and it has to be real Pali. I'm saying, this is real Pali, right? And I'm saying, but they, like Pali writing. I'm saying, well, which one do you want? And you can have all of these Pali kinds of Pali writing. So the same with all the Indian languages, that they were written in the local script, and they don't have to be written in just one script. So there's no one Pali way of writing it, but just whatever the local language was. All right. Any questions about that?
What was the language closest to Pali at the time of Buddhism?
Historically, in terms of the languages that we have witnesses for, obviously many languages have vanished, right? But the Magadhi of the Ashokan inscriptions is very similar to Pali, okay? In fact, sometimes they're called the same language. So sometimes Pali is called Magadhi. So, and really, language definition is really kind of meaningless, actually. It's just a convention that linguists use. You could say that Pali and Magadhi are slightly different dialects of the same language, or you could say that they're different languages. Yeah. So if you read the Ashokan inscriptions, then, if you know Pali, then you can read those inscriptions fairly easily. But, a few spellings and a few bits and things are a bit different. Yeah. But it's still a matter of contention among linguists as to where exactly Pali came from, like what was the exact linguistic source. Yeah. All right? Good. Okay, Dhamma Savanam. Now, one time the Buddha was staying near Vaisali at the Great Wood in the hall with the peaked roof. Who knows who's been to Vaisali? Anyone been to Vaisali? You've been to Vaisali? Ah, very good. No? Really? No one's been there. Okay, so does anybody know where it is? No? So one of the things that you can do on Sutta Central is that you can find maps. Cool, right? So if I want to know where Vaisali is, then I can open this up, and then we have a map there that gives all of the different places that are mentioned in the suttas. And we can go in here and find, the map isn't great, I have to admit. We're going to rebuild it again. But Vaisali is, where are we now? It's Gorakhpur. There's Kushinara. Vaisali is just near there. Pava. Anandachetya. Where is it? So we made this map because we wanted people to know that all of these places we talk about, here we go. All these places we talk about in the suttas are real places. So here's Vaisali, and that's the city, the Vajjian country, and it's just north of the Ganges. And so you can visit Vaisali today, and they have a beautiful Ashokan pillar. Okay. So you can find that map just by searching any place name on Sutta Central, and it will tell you where the things are. Okay. Where are we now? So, the Buddha was staying near Vaisali at the great wood in the hall with a peaked roof. Then Mahapajapati Gautami went up to the Buddha, bowed, stood to one side, and said to him, of course, as I'm sure you all know, Mahapajapati Gautami being the Buddha's stepmother. Sir, may the Buddha please teach me Dhamma in brief. When I've heard it, I'll live alone, withdrawn, keen, diligent, keen, and resolute. Now, this is a standard passage which we find in the suttas, and what it's used for is when there is a monastic, a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni, who has been living in the community for a while, and they have learned all the basics and mastered the basics and so on, and then the time is right for them to go on retreat. And so they go to the Buddha, they say they're ready to go live on retreat, and they ask for a teaching to contemplate during that period of retreat. So this is how the retreats were done at that time. Now, interesting to notice how that's not the way retreats are usually done today. Right? Usually retreats are done today because someone thinks, I want to go on retreat. And they go on retreat. Yeah? And are they ready to go on retreat? Is it going to be beneficial? Is it the right time for them? I don't know. I booked it. I'm going to go. Yeah? So the Buddha is actually giving guidance to people who are ready for that right time. And the suttas, this is another aspect of early Buddhism which is important to remember and which often is forgotten these days. There is a right time to go on retreat. And the Buddha said, for some people would come to him and ask these questions, and the Buddha would say, you've never listened to me, all this time you've been a monk, who says you're going to start now? Yeah? And some people were not ready to go on a retreat. Yeah? So, yeah. Mahapajapati, obviously, not one of those people. Instead, what the Buddha gives to Mahapajapati is a very important teaching. By the way, how are we going for hearing up the back? Are we still good? We can still hear? Okay. All right, Gautami, you might know that certain things lead to passion, not dispassion. To being fettered, not being unfettered. To accumulation, not dispersal. To more desires, not fewer. To lack of contentment, not contentment. To crowding, not seclusion. To laziness, not energy. To being burdensome, not being unburdensome. You should definitely bear it in mind that these things are not the teaching, not the training, and not the teacher's instructions. You might know that certain things lead to dispassion, not passion, to being unfettered, not to being fettered, to dispersal, not accumulation, to fewer desires, not more, to contentment, not lack of contentment, to seclusion, not crowding, to energy, not laziness, to being unburdensome, not being burdensome. You should definitely bear it in mind that these things are the teaching, the training, and the teacher's instructions. So in these short paragraphs, the Buddha is giving a very succinct and very powerful guide to the teachings. Now we can see a number of things from the characteristic of the teaching that the Buddha is giving to Mahapajapati at this time and this place. The first thing is notice how it's phrased. You might know that certain things, the Buddha is relying on her judgment and her wisdom. Sometimes the Buddha would be more explicit. He might say, these are the things that lead to passion and not to dispassion, and then he would give a list of them. Because some people need that, right? Some people need that whole list given to them. But Mahapajapati didn't. So the Buddha is calling her to remind her of those things she has already learnt. Remember previously the Dhammasavana, 5 benefits, learn new things, clarify what you've learnt. So this is what we're doing here. We're deepening the knowledge that has already been learned. And so the Buddha doesn't need to spell out all of the details, but he's pointing her in a direction to know what is the Dhamma and what is not the Dhamma. Now also notice something that's interesting about this one is that while Mahapajapati wants to go on retreat and go in to do intensive meditation, the Buddha is not exactly giving her specific meditation instructions, right? He's not saying do anapanasati, he's not saying do this meditation or that meditation. Now, obviously, she would have already learnt how to meditate, and she would already be practicing. So here, the direction and what is important is that attitude and that motivation in your mind, not so much the details of the meditation technique. And this is another point at which modern Buddhism is sometimes different from what we find in early Buddhism. And in modern Buddhism, often when people talk about meditation, that what they do is they talk about details of meditation techniques. In the suttas, we don't find nearly so much about details of meditation techniques, but we find a lot more about how you are living. What is the attitude in your mind? What is the focus and the direction that your mind is going to be taking? These are the things that really matter. And that's something that actually I found, in my experience, was very much reflected in the Thai forest tradition. And the Thai forest tradition, they don't put so much emphasis on meditation method. Yes, of course, they will teach meditation methods, but they're not like really insistent on them. And if you go to a forest monastery, and they say, have you meditated before? What kind of meditation have you done? And if you say, I've done Mahasi technique or Goenka technique or Anapanasati or I've done these things, then most of the time they'll say, okay, that's good. Just be mindful. They're not worried too much about what kind of meditation you do. They're worried that you be mindful. It's about how you do it. How you do the meditation, what you bring to the meditation. Actually, all the meditations are good. All the techniques are good because they're all teaching you to let go. They're all teaching you to be mindful. They're all teaching you to see impermanence. All of these are good things. But sometimes we can get too attached to the details of the technique. I'm doing it the right way, you're doing it the wrong way. This is how you need to do it, not that way. This teacher's right and this teacher's wrong. So that's attitude, is that coming from attachment to views. So always remember that when we're practicing the Dhamma and practicing the meditation, which is the right way to practice? Whatever leads to dispassion and not passion. Huh? This is the right way to practice. Yeah? People come to me and they say, I'm meditating like this. Is this the right way to meditate? And this is always what I reflect back on them. Is this leading to more greed or less greed? More hate or less hate? More delusion or less delusion? This is the right way to practice. Huh? Any questions about this one before we move on? Nilushi.
Probably no, but I just kind of understand passion in this context. Like, I consider it to be like enthusiasm. Surely you can be enthusiastic about good things. How would you interpret it?
Okay. So I'll just pull up the Pali so we can see exactly what it's saying here. So the Pali is passion and dispassion. Passion is saragaya, and dispassion no viraga. Okay, so raga meaning desire or passion or lust. Yeah, and so there's the contrasting. So this is like accumulating, getting more of it, more raga, and this one is getting less raga. So there are many, many, many words in Pali for desire. We have iccha, chanda, lobha, raga, so many. And they all have different nuances. Yeah. So this one, raga, always has a negative nuance. It always means that kind of sensual desire or like a desire with attachment and so on. I think pretty much always has that negative sense. Other forms, like chanda, for example, is a neutral form. Sometimes it's used in a good sense, like chanda iddhipada is a positive, wholesome desire, like you said, like enthusiasm, and sometimes it can be a negative sense, like kama chanda, sensual desire. Yeah? So, so in this case, it's specifically those forms of desire that lead to attachment, remembering that that always comes back to the second noble truth, right? Remember what I said before, all of these teachings we see in the context of the Four Noble Truths. Desire is the second noble truth, right? But not just any desire. Yes? What kind of desire is in the second noble truth? Who wants to tell me? Second noble truth. Yayang Tanha Paunabhavika. What does that mean? So Paunabhava, literally to re-exist, but actually what it means is to get born again. Yeah? So Yayang Tanha Paunabhavika means any kind of desire that leads you to getting reborn. That's the point. Yeah? So those desires that are on the side of attachment, this is something I also didn't understand. The first Buddhist book I ever read was a book called Handbook for Mankind by Ajahn Buddhadasa, and he talked about the arahant. And when I read that, my mind was completely blown. I had no understanding, like what is this? What is an arahant? What does it mean? What does it mean to have somebody who's perfected? How can you have somebody who has no desires? I'm like, how could they get up in the morning? You have to have a desire to get up. How would they brush their teeth? Yeah, you've got to have a desire to brush your teeth. Yeah? But these are not desires born of attachment. Yeah? These are not yayang tanha bono bhavika. Yeah? So this is just simple desires. This is okay, but it's not to do with attachment. Right? But the point being that if an arahant brushed his teeth, or her teeth, and ran out of toothpaste, they wouldn't get angry. This is the difference. Okay. Good. Okay, we'll do one more sutta before the lunch break. 6.68. All right, so here we're back in the Anguttara Nikaya, AN 6.68. Again, on the topic of listening to the Dhamma. Mendicant, someone with 6 qualities, is unable to enter the sure path with regards to skillful qualities, even when listening to the true teaching. Now, I'm going to have to explain this a little bit because this is a very idiomatic expression in the Pali. It's a knotty, sometimes these Pali technical terms are knotty to try to translate them clearly. So apologize if the meaning doesn't come through clearly. So this is, the Pali here is sadhammang abhabo niyamang okkamitong kusulesu dhammesu sammatang. And so what that means, to enter the sure path, right? The sure path is niyamang okkamitong. This is a technical term, and what it means is to enter the path to stream entry. All right? So again, we find often the same thing is expressed in many different ways in the suttas, so we have to try to make it clearly. So to enter the sure path with regards to skillful qualities basically means to become a stream enterer, or to enter the paths of stream entry. All right? So what this is saying is, if you have 6 qualities, you cannot become a stream enterer, even if you get to hear the Dhamma. Surely this should be of interest to all of us, right? We all want to become stream enterers? Yes? At least? Nilushi's looking uncertain. Go on, Nilushi. Try it out and see. Right? So stream enterer, the first stage of the Buddha's path to awakening. Yeah? It's all right, you can become a stream enterer. You don't have to let go of all your sense desires. You can still enjoy nice things and be a stream enterer, so it's kind of a halfway house. I think it's not how I think. I think a lot of people think like that, though. Anyway, so number 1, when the teaching and practice proclaimed by... interesting. Mistranslation there. I have to go back and check that. When the teaching and practice proclaimed by the realized one is being taught, they don't want to listen. They don't lend an ear or apply their mind to understand them. They learn the incorrect teaching and reject the correct meaning. So they learn the incorrect meaning and reject the correct meaning. They accept views that contradict the teaching. Someone with 6 qualities unable to enter the sure path with regards to skillful qualities. Someone with 6 qualities is able to enter, and of course it's the reverse. When the teaching and practice proclaimed by the realized one is being taught, they want to listen. They lend an ear and apply their mind to practice to understand them. They learn the correct meaning and reject the incorrect meaning. They accept views that agree with the teaching. All right. So I'm going to go through these different items. First one, the teaching and practice proclaimed by the realized one, so that's the Tathagata Vedite Dhamma Vinaya. So you notice that I've translated Dhamma Vinaya as teaching and practice. Actually, I'll probably go back and change that. I think I changed it later to teaching and training rather than teaching and practice. One thing that's important to know is that when we're reading the suttas, the word Dhamma Vinaya doesn't mean it doesn't mean what we would think it means, right? So usually today we would think Dhamma Vinaya, the Dhamma is like the suttas, and the Vinaya is the Vinaya Pitaka. That's the obvious meaning, right? The Vinaya is Vinaya Pitaka. But usually in the suttas, that's not what it means, because usually it's given these things are given in a general context, which is not specifically about monastic Vinaya. So the word Vinaya is used in many contexts in the suttas, and most commonly it means a training or an education or a practice. Okay, so in a way, Dhamma Vinaya means theory and practice. Dhamma is the teaching, and the Vinaya is the application of that teaching. Usually that's what Dhamma Vinaya means in the suttas. Sometimes it means Vinaya Pitaka, but less commonly. Okay, so when the Buddha is teaching the Dhamma Vinaya, so the theory and the application of that theory, they don't want to listen. This is the first thing. So again, this comes back to the question of desire, right? Do you want to listen? Do you want to learn? And if you don't have that desire, that eagerness to learn, that's the first one. You're not going to understand. Yeah? You have to want to learn. For those, any Pali student, anyone here studying Pali? Is monks studying Pali? You're studying Pali? Anyone else? Doing Pali studies? No? You are? Any bhikkhunis here? Started but stopped. A tale as old as time itself. You know what a better way is? Start and don't stop.
I think teacher is also important.
It is, yeah, it's true.
Because school, of course, as a young person, I didn't like it at all. But
Yeah,
because this young lecturer was very good.
yeah.
Because he had learned Chinese.
Yeah,
So he knew that it was close.
Yeah.
Other languages.
yeah. Okay, so for any students of Pali, here's an unusual form. This is a desiderative reduplication, sususati, meaning to want to hear. So you reduplicate the root, su, to hear, and sususati means to want to hear. Okay. They don't lend an ear. Yeah? Nasotang odahati. Yeah? Put your ear forward. Yesterday we were talking about this a little bit yesterday when we were talking about setting up the room. And this is why I said that I want to try to avoid using the PA system. Okay? Why? Because I used to be a musician. Right? And when you're a musician, you know one simple trick. If you want people to listen, you play quieter. Yeah? Why? Because your ears are like your eyes. If you're in a very bright place with lots of light, then your eyes will shut down. They will withdraw and they will shut the light out. If you're in a dark place, your eyes will open up so they can see. Your ears are just the same. If you're in a place where the sound is very loud, your ears will shut down. Yeah? And you see that. If you turn up the loud sound, people not listening so much, they feel happier to shuffle around, make some noise and so on, to talk to the person next to them. Yeah? As soon as you turn up the sound, people's ears are not paying attention. When the sound is quieter, people's ears open up. Yeah? They lean forward. Oh, what was that? Oh, I didn't quite catch that. Yeah? Yeah? So, sotang nasotang odahati. Yeah? So as a teacher, I try to be sensitive to these factors in the environment, because I always want to teach in a way that is going to be comprehensible to the students. So I look at the acoustics, I look at the place, I look at how things are set up, and I think, how is it that people are going to hear and to understand? It's my responsibility as a teacher. But your responsibility, pay attention, open the ears. Yeah? Sotang odahati. Na anya chittang upattapeti. Upattapeti. To apply your mind towards understanding. Again, this is an active process. I had this conversation recently, actually, a friend of mine in Sydney who's just learning Dhamma teaching and is just starting to become a Dhamma teacher, and she asked about this. She said most of her friends think that you should just listen to Dhamma passively and just let it absorb it, and then somehow it goes in. I'm like, no. No, this is not how it works. Yeah? Actually, the Buddha always said you actively engage. Yeah? Again, this is very psychologically acute. This is the same thing that a modern educator would teach you. If you learn teaching, that you have to apply yourself to understand. Yeah? So, but it's up to you to apply your mind, to set your mind up to want to understand. Yeah? So, anattang ganhati, they learn the incorrect meaning and reject attang rinjati. Yeah? So ganhati is to take up, to be attached to hold on to the incorrect meaning. Yeah? And attang rinjati, to reject. Yeah? So this is what we were referring to before. When we are listening and when we are trying to understand the Dhamma, yeah, it is crucial to set aside your own beliefs and preferences. You don't have to throw them away. You can pick them up again later if you want. You can leave them there if you want, but you can pick them up later. But while you're listening, set your preferences and views aside. if you hear something that's different from what you believe, oh, okay, interesting, yeah? Don't have to accept it, right? But just hold it in mind, yeah? And don't just reject things just out of hand. Maybe you're wrong, actually, yeah? So this is that process where we can hold things in mind. Yeah, okay. And the last one is anulomikaya khantiya samanagato hoti. So again, these terms always connecting with things that we're finding in different places throughout the teaching. So, for example, that anulomika, what this means is, again, for the Pali students here, you can tell me what loma is? Hair. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so the loma is the hair. Anu is in line with the hair. Yes? And against anuloma is against the hair. Yeah? In English you might say against the grain. Yeah? So it's like you're patting your pet. You pat your pet with the hair, or you pat it against the hair, and it's all prickly. Yeah? So this is if you are accepting samanagato. So if you're taking up, you're adopting views that are in contradiction with the teaching, contradiction with what the Buddha said. So notice here the difference here. The word here is khanti, right? Khanti. Many people will be familiar with the meaning of khanti as in patience, yeah? But khanti also has a meaning of acceptance, yeah? Particularly in this context of views, to accept a view. So this is different from what I was talking about before. Before I was talking about like suspending or holding a view up, right, without accepting or rejecting it, yeah? So what this is talking about is that moment when you say, oh no, actually that is right, yes. I'm going to give up meditation and instead I'm going to put hooks through my body and suspend myself off a truck and drive around the streets because that's the path to Nibbana. Yeah? So once you do that, then this is anulomikaya khantiya. Yeah? So with these qualities, if you have these qualities, then you're unable to enter the stream. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't benefit from the Dhamma. Right? You can still benefit to some degree, but there's like a hardness or an obstruction in the mind which is really stopping you from understanding and from benefiting fully. Yeah? So I think it's really interesting that the Buddha is phrasing it in this way. Yeah? So in listening to the Dhamma, we bring these qualities, and this is what allows us gives us the possibility to be able to realize the Dhamma. This is Anguttara Nikaya 5.26, one of the ones in your reading. Mendicants, there are these 5 opportunities for freedom. If a mendicant stays diligent, keen and resolute at these times, their mind is freed, their defilements are ended, and they arrive at the supreme sanctuary. What 5? Firstly, the teacher or a respected spiritual companion teaches Dhamma to a mendicant. That mendicant feels inspired by the teaching, and the teaching that mendicant feels inspired by the meaning and the teaching in that Dhamma, no matter how the teacher or respected spiritual companion teaches it. Feeling inspired, joy springs up. Being joyful, rapture springs up. When the mind is full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, one feels bliss. When blissful, the mind becomes immersed in samadhi. This is the first opportunity for freedom. If a mendicant stays diligent, keen and resolute at this time, their mind is freed, their defilements are ended, and they arrive at the supreme sanctuary. Furthermore, it may be that neither the teacher nor a respected spiritual companion teaches Dhamma to a mendicant, but that mendicant teaches Dhamma in detail to others as they learned and memorized it. That mendicant feels inspired by the meaning and the teaching in that Dhamma, no matter how they teach it in detail to others as they learned and memorized it. Feeling inspired, joy springs up. Being joyful, rapture springs up. When the mind is full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, one feels bliss. And when blissful, the mind becomes immersed in samadhi. This is the second opportunity for freedom. Furthermore, it may be that neither the teacher nor the mendicant teaches Dhamma, but the mendicant recites the teaching in detail as they learned and memorized it. That mendicant feels inspired by the meaning and the teaching in that Dhamma, no matter how they recite it in detail as they learned and memorized it. Feeling inspired, joy springs up. Being joyful, rapture springs up. When the mind is full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, one feels bliss. And when blissful, the mind becomes immersed in samadhi. This is the third opportunity for freedom. Furthermore, it may be that neither the teacher nor the mendicant teaches Dhamma, nor does the mendicant recite the teaching, but the mendicant thinks about and considers the teaching in their heart, examining it with their mind as they learned and memorized it. That mendicant feels inspired by the meaning and the teaching in that Dhamma, no matter how they think about and consider it in their heart, examining it with their mind as they learned and memorized it. Feeling inspired, joy springs up. Being joyful, rapture springs up. When the mind is full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, one feels bliss. And when blissful, the mind becomes immersed in samadhi. This is the fourth opportunity for freedom. Furthermore, it may be that neither the teacher nor the mendicant teaches Dhamma, nor does the mendicant recite the teaching or think about it. But a meditation subject as a foundation of immersion is properly grasped, attended, borne in mind, and comprehended with wisdom. That mendicant feels inspired by the meaning and the teaching in that Dhamma, no matter how a meditation subject as a foundation of immersion is properly grasped, attended, borne in mind, and comprehended with wisdom. Feeling inspired, joy springs up. Being joyful, rapture springs up. When the mind is full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, one feels bliss. And when blissful, the mind becomes immersed in samadhi. This is the fifth opportunity for freedom. These are the 5 opportunities for freedom. If a mendicant stays diligent, keen, and resolute at these times, their mind is freed, their defilements are ended, and they arrive at the supreme sanctuary. All right. So this is the Vimutta Yatana Sutta. There are a number of suttas that are similar to this, but we're going to focus on this one for now. So this is a sutta which, obviously the main thrust of the sutta is to talk about different situations, different contexts, where if we attend in the right way and if we bring the right qualities of mind and heart to that experience, that it can be an experience that will lead to not only learning about things, but also to an emotional uplift that can lead even as far as samadhi and to liberation from defilements. And so those 5 opportunities, the first one is when somebody is teaching the Dhamma to you. Second one is when you are teaching the Dhamma yourself. Yeah? Third one is when you are reciting the teaching. Yeah? You're doing chanting. Fourth one is when you are thinking about and reflecting about the teaching. And the fifth one is when you are meditating. Okay? 5 opportunities. Now, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail and have a look at what the text actually says. Okay? So first, and I'm just going to discuss a few of the phrases and terms as we go. First of all, the main phrase here, the opportunity for freedom, the vimutta yatana. So the word vimutta, freedom or liberation or release. Ayatana is an interesting phrase. It literally comes from the verb ayati, to spread out. Yeah? So to ayati is to spread out or to pull out. So I often translate ayatana as dimension. Yeah, because it's something which has been spread out, like a dimension of something. So the dimension of infinite space. I like that because it sounds very sci-fi. Okay, and also is literal as well. And if you can make it be both literal and sci-fi, I mean, this is the best of both worlds. So, I mean, this is, you know, even this rendering is one of those nuances that you can see, like to me, the influence of early Buddhism, because Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations, he usually uses the word base for this. So he would probably say the 5 bases for freedom. And that understanding of ayatana as base is drawn from the commentaries. Yeah? And so I tend to avoid it, as I don't think that that particular sense is really justified in the suttas. So I think most of the time, maybe occasionally, it maybe have that sense, but most of the time, ayatana has that idea of an opening or a spreading out. So you can see here, the 5 opportunities. I could have said the 5 openings, right? There's another one. There's something that's spread out. It's an opening for you to find freedom. Now, so obviously, it's, as with most suttas, it's referring to the bhikkhu, the mendicant. And, but that doesn't mean that lay folk get off scot-free. No, you still have to do the work as well, okay? And most of the time in the suttas, the Buddha refers to the bhikkhus, but usually there would have been a kind of a diverse audience there, right? So, and you see this quite a few discourses where the Buddha may be like addressing bhikkhus, but then you can see actually in the discourse, maybe there were bhikkhunis there as well, maybe there were lay people there as well who are part of the discussion. So when he's using the word bhikkhus, it doesn't mean that it's meant only for bhikkhus, it's just like by convention that that's how the texts are addressed. Stays keen, resolute, their mind is free, defilements ended, they arrive at the supreme sanctuary. Oh, so I'll say a few words about this word, the Anuttarang Yoga Kema. And this is another one of these words which has a very nice meaning in Pali, often translated as something like a supreme surcease of bondage is one translation, and many different translations. So the word here is yoga, kema. Yoga has by itself 2 distinct kinds of meanings in the suttas. It does not mean doing stretches down at your local center, okay? That's the word for yoga is not, that's a later meaning for yoga. So it has 2 meanings. One, it means effort. Yeah? So to put forth effort is to exert yoga. So in other words, the Buddha said, in order to realize the 4 Noble Truths, yogo karenio, which you could translate as to realize the 4 Noble Truths, you should do yoga. But I don't think that's exactly what it meant. So this is why sometimes when you're translating, you can't keep the original words. People think, oh, if you translate, you keep the original words and then you preserve the meaning. But that's exactly wrong. In that particular case, literally, if you want to realize the 4 Noble Truths, do yoga. It's literally what the sutta says, all right? But of course, the word yoga changes, yeah? So it means in suttas sometimes effort, as I said, but also it can mean an attachment, all right? Why? It seems strange. Why does it have those 2 quite different meanings, yeah? Well, the word yoga comes from, or is related to the English word yoke, as in not the egg, but as in what goes on a horse or a buffalo, yeah? The yoke of an animal. And so you can see there that why those 2 meanings come in, because if you have like a pair of buffalo and you put a yoke on them, then they're tied together and they're attached, yeah? But they're also ready to do work, yeah? So this is those 2 meanings actually come from the metaphor where the word, the root of the word comes from. Now, the question is, what is the meaning here? And actually, it's been interpreted kind of in both of those ways. So some people say that yoga in this case means like a bondage or attachment. Other people will say it means the effort and the work that you have to do. But to me, the real understanding of what's happening here came through a really excellent bit of research done by, what's his name? Is it Witzel? I think it's Witzel. I have to look it up. I think it's Witzel, who did a research into the original meaning of Kema, okay? And he's a Vedic scholar, and he looked at what these words mean in the Vedas. Now, when looking at the word yoga, right, the very fact that the same word is in English and in Pali tells us that this is a very old word, right? It comes from the ancient Indo-European language, which stems from maybe 2,000, 3,000 years BC. So, a couple of thousand years before the Buddha even. Right? And when the Indo-European peoples were in the Caucasus, in the Central Asian region, before one group went out west, to Europe, another group went down south to Persia and then to India. Now, one of the great questions of this is why and how? Like the Indo-Europeans, we know that they went over all of these areas, and we know that here we are in Sri Lanka, and the local language is a branch of the Indo-European family. And we can travel all the way to Iceland and find Indo-European languages all along that way. How did they get that far? They got that far by learning how to put yokes on horses. That's how they did it. And that's why this word is such an important word in these different traditions. They learned to tame the horse, to ride horses, to develop the chariots, and that was their cutting-edge military technology. That's how they spread across all of that area, because they learned to tame the horse. So the yoke has a very powerful meaning for the people within that culture. Now, they didn't just use the yoke for military reasons, but it was also a major part of the lifestyle. They were a nomadic pastoral people. They had herds of cows. Again, we know how important the cow is to that culture. And they would wander across the steppes, wander across the grasslands, going in search of new places, new pastures, and just think into that life. Imagine what that's like. Wandering across the grasslands with your herd of cow, with your people, your horses, and just going from one place to another. Imagine how weary your feet would be at the end of the day. I mean, look, you're used to it. It's your life, okay? So you're pretty fit. And you can do that. But still, walking all day, it would be pretty tiring. And sometimes it will be very hot. Sometimes it will be freezing cold. Sometimes it will be raining. And you have to endure all of these hardships as you're traveling across. And then at the end of the day, you reach a beautiful lake with some lovely trees and some grass, and you can unyoke all of your beasts, let the yoke down, stretch out your feet, have a bath, have some dinner, tell each other some stories by the campfire, and that feeling of relief and ease. And that is Kema. This is the original meaning of the word Kema. It's where it comes from. Kema originally meant an oasis or a sanctuary. It's the place that you reach at the end of the day when you can put down all of your worries and your troubles and you can finally relax. And even in the suttas, more commonly actually in the Jatakas, you still find this meaning of Kema quite commonly. There's a number of Jataka stories that talk about a lake called Kema. Same meaning. And that lake is a sanctuary, and all of the geese and all of the deer, everyone comes there and they enjoy that. And you even have Jataka stories that will talk about setting up a covenant between the humans and the animals, where the humans will say, no, we won't hunt you if you come to the Kema, to the place of safety. You can go there and enjoy the grass and enjoy the food. We won't hunt you there, but there has to be a deal. You're not allowed to come and eat our crops, okay? And so this is where this idea of Kema comes from. And so when I've translated it, I've translated it as sanctuary to try to bring that idea across, that this is really what it means, a place of safety, a place of rest, a place of refuge. So this is the Kema, or the Yoga Kema, the sanctuary. All right, so so the first Vimuttayatana, the teacher, that's the Buddha, of course, or another respected spiritual companion, Garutaniyosa Brahmachari, teaches the Dhamma. You know? And so then you feel inspired. Now what this sutta is focusing on is not so much the content of the teaching, but your emotional response to the teaching. That sense of inspiration that you can get. And for me, in my history, I still remember those times when I heard a really beautiful Dhamma talk. And I know that these things are very context dependent. You know, like when we were in a forest monastery, and you'd go out into the forest, and there's a hall there, and the moon be shining down, and all the monks would be sitting quietly in the hall, and then you can go there, and everything is like conditioning to lift you up and to expect something really special. Yeah? And even when we were at Santi Monastery, and I would do Dhamma talks there, I always just loved doing the talks in the hall, in the cave. So we made a cave there. And so you'd have to walk out. And I did this quite deliberately because I wanted to make an awe-inspiring place for teaching Dhamma. Yeah? That means that the place does half the work, and my job is much easier. Yeah? I can do just a very average Dhamma talk, and people will say, wow, that was so powerful. And you had to walk. You know, this is like a 15-minute walk to go through the forest to go and get there. And it brings a sense of treasuring that Dhamma and a sense of inspiration that comes from it. So this is something that we don't, like in modern education, we often kind of miss this, don't we? People will talk about like the content of learning and the things you're supposed to learn, but they don't really talk much about the emotional response to actually learning things. And I think this is something that we need to bear in mind. It's hard these days, right? It's hard, especially we're doing lots of talks on Zoom and everything. Then it's not really quite as inspiring, is it? You can still learn the content, yeah? But that sense of inspiration, there has to be something which is special about it. There has to be something which is rare, you know? If you just watch it on YouTube, never mind. You know, you don't have to quite pay attention so much, and then you get halfway through, I feel like a cup of tea, so I'll go and make a cup of tea, and I probably won't miss much before I come back. So that sense of immersion and focus is not quite there. Anyway, so inspired, joy springs up, joyful rapture springs up. So this is that familiar process of the arising of happiness and pleasure through the process which most commonly in the suttas is taught in the context of meditation. So what this sutta is showing us is that we can have a similar response when listening to the Dhamma. So the pamoja is a sense of happiness and gladness. Pamoja is an ordinary sense of just being happy with something. Yeah? Pamoja is a very simple one. Yeah? So this I've translated as joy. Yeah? When you are being joyful, then rapture springs up. Yeah? We call piti. And piti is a slightly more subtle, a more powerful version of pamoja. Yeah? And you can sometimes feel that piti if you feel like a thrill going through your body, or you feel like a sense of maybe the hairs on your arms will rise up, or you just sort of feel that sense of joy washing over you. And these are different manifestations of piti. And you can experience these in meditation, but you can also experience them when listening to a Dhamma talk. When the mind is full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. Piti manasa kayo pasambhati. always in the early Buddhism that the mind and the body always go together. Yeah? And that joy that we're feeling is an embodied joy. We are used to feeling that in the context of meditation. When we meditate and we feel that our breath becomes quiet, breath becomes tranquil, yeah? Becomes even and smooth. You know, initially that's like the breath it's not so ragged, it's not so craggy, and we can feel it becoming more smooth. And as it deepens though, you can feel that smoothness becomes almost like a silkiness to it. It has almost this kind of tangible feeling where that physical feeling of the breath actually just feels inherently pleasurable. And so this is the same thing that you can feel in your body, because the energies and the tensions inside your body are settling down, and all of the ways that our body is like fighting itself, they get kind of resolved, and the body's not holding on, and everything becomes very smooth. And it becomes very pleasant and very joyful. And when you're sitting there, you just feel, oh, it feels so nice to be here in my body. Yeah? I mean, we know in meditation that, you know, it can be hard to sit still. It can be hard to experience and, you know, endure the different pains and so on which the body is giving us. Yeah? Why is that? Why is it that our body is uncomfortable? It's odd, isn't it? You'd think that our bodies would evolve to be comfortable, right? I mean, just think about it. If I was God, okay, and I was to say, let's design a body for these humans, would I want the body to be uncomfortable for them? Seems weird, doesn't it? Yeah. So the body's kind of uncomfortable in a way for a reason, right? It's in a way it's kind of alerting us to pains, alerting us to dangers and so on. It's keeping us a bit on edge. And as we go deeper into that meditation, again, that sense of kema, right? That sense that we can relax, we can put everything down. We don't have to be alert. We don't have to be attending to every little itch or every little scratch or every little feeling. And as our worries in our mind is fading away, then the tensions inside the body will fade away as well. And when that becomes very deep, then the mind can go into samadhi. So obviously we're going to be talking more about samadhi in subsequent talks. The second one, then, when you're teaching, all right, also can be a very joyful occasion. And, you know, for myself, I can just speak from my own experience as a teacher. I've been teaching Dhamma for a long time now, maybe nearly 15 years or something like that. And I've given a lot of Dhamma talks, and some good ones, some bad ones, some halfway in between ones. But there are some times when you're giving a Dhamma talk, when you can really get into the flow. Yeah? Not now, because I've got all this technology. So it doesn't work, right? So this is good for doing some kinds of things, but this is also why I'm very cautious about these things. For certain kinds of things, yes, we can do this, but I can't really get into the flow of the Dhamma when I'm teaching like this. Yeah? But sometimes I can. Yeah? Maybe if you're on a retreat or you have a special occasion. Sometimes it's weird, sometimes it's unpredictable, you know? Maybe you've had a busy day and you're feeling tired and so on, and then when you come to do the talk, then suddenly you just slot right into it. Yeah? And you can actually feel that Dhamma starting to flow. And then that also can be a very joyful experience. Now, the next one is after hearing the teaching, then you can recite it as you have learned and memorized it. All right? So this is yatha sutang, having learned, yatha paryaptang, sajjhayang karoti. You know? the suttas were taught in a time of an oral culture when it was normal that when the teachings were given, that you would be able to memorize it. This is how you were trained. So you'd be trained to be able to memorize it. Also notice the manner of the teaching here, the repetition especially. Yeah? The overriding characteristic of the suttas is how repetitive it is. Why is it so repetitive? It's so people can memorize it. Yeah? That's why. And it's interesting how that connects with that quality of joy. Yeah? Notice how when it's talking about that experience of the Dhamma, it's talking about the joyfulness of it. Yeah? It's easy when reading the suttas, for many people, it doesn't feel very joyful because there's too many repetitions. It's boring. I just want to know what it says. Yeah? But when you're listening, and especially when you're reciting, it's exactly the opposite feeling. Because when you're reciting, it's those repetitions that actually feel very joyful. Yeah? That's why reciting the Dhamma can be a very beautiful experience. We're going to be reciting some suttas later on. And then pay attention to this when you're reciting, because each time you come to like the refrain of a verse or to a repeated passage in the prose, then it's like, you can relax into it. It gives you that sense of ease and you can contemplate the meaning of it more easily. So when we see the repetitions in the suttas, the emotional response when reciting it is almost the opposite of the emotional response when reading it. Yeah? Of course, this is why when the Buddhist tradition adopted writing, so the Buddhist tradition has always been the spiritual tradition of technological innovation. Right? We were the first to write down our scriptures. Yeah? And in India, the oldest writing is Buddhist, the oldest manuscripts are Buddhist, the oldest written scriptures are Buddhist. In China, the first printed texts are Buddhist, the first printed text in movable type are Buddhist, and the first printed books are Buddhist. All right? So we have always been at the forefront of information technology. Yeah? And the printed book was invented specifically because the Chinese Tripitaka is so big and it's too expensive to pay people to copy it. So they figured out how to do printing instead, so now we have books. Yeah? But the problem is that none of these technologies are neutral, not to speak of modern technologies, computers and all of these things. And we're just having a discussion now about machine translation and AI. So this group has now taken our translations from Sutta Central and they're feeding it into an AI and then translating all of the rest of the Chinese Tripitaka based on that AI model. Okay, so there's friends of ours who are doing this work. And so we're just having a discussion about this. And is this a good idea? Right? Is this ethical? How is an AI supposed to understand the Dhamma? Well, obviously it doesn't. And so on, right? But this has always been the case. Technologies are not neutral. Yeah? No technology is neutral. And we can go all the way back to the first time that they decided to write down the suttas. So the first record we have of the complete Tripitaka being written down is from the Aloka Vihara in Sri Lanka, about 20 BC. Sorry? Aloka Vihara in Sinhala, Aloka Vihara in Pali. Yeah, so it's Aloka Vihara, it's the Sinhala version. And the Aloka Vihara is where? In Matale. Okay. Will we be going near there? Yeah, we're going there, okay. And so that was about 20 BC. Now you can imagine, like I always think at that time, right? I would have been sitting around there as a grumpy old monk, whinging and complaining, oh, these young monks copying out suttas onto manuscripts, oh my God. They completely lost the plot, You can only understand the Dhamma if you memorize it. It has to be in your heart. Right? What's this newfangled books things? No, this is not Dhamma. This is just marks on paper. All you're going to do is you're going to get this, you're going to put it in your cupboard and you're going to forget about it. Yeah? You have to learn it. That's what I would have been like. Yeah. So these technologies are not neutral. So when we're reading the suttas, we're seeing how the Buddha did those teachings in that time. And of course that raises all of those questions about like early Buddhism as opposed to what we are doing, because we do have all these things. I do actually work on Sutta Central. We do have projectors and digital technologies and we're using all of these things, and it's not that same experience. Yeah? It's not that same experience. So I think it's important to not lose sight of that potential and that power that comes from these qualities of the oral tradition. And I think one thing that has been done well, one thing I think which is good in Buddhism and the Buddhist traditions, is that we have never actually lost the oral tradition, actually. Yeah? We write books, yes, we have the books, we have the websites and everything, but we still do our chanting. Yeah? And we still recite suttas. And, even if it's just a simple puja or something like that, then any Buddhist will know at least a few of those verses and a few things. So we know something of what that's like. So we'll be doing some chanting a bit later on this evening. And, we can get to revisit a little bit of what that's like to have that oral tradition. Then the next one is thinking about and considering the Dhamma as they learned it and memorized it. Anuvitaketi, anuvichareti. So here, manas anupekati. So notice in this line here, in the Pali, is interesting. We have anuvitaketi, anuvichareti, anupekati. Yeah? Lots of anus here. Yes? So the prefix anu has a sense of afterwards or along. Yeah? So it has that idea, like once you've heard the teaching, that you keep on contemplating about it. Yeah? You keep on reflecting. Yeah? It's not something that's just finished. Yeah? It's not just hear the teaching and then that's done. But you keep on thinking and reflecting about it. And again, I think a difference between early Buddhism and some modern Buddhist traditions, not all of them, but some modern Buddhist traditions, then they tell you, don't think. Don't think. Right? And they'll tell you any kind of thinking is wrong and you should stop thinking. Yeah? Which is weird because everyone thinks and it's normal. So the Buddha didn't say don't think. What he said was train yourself to think in a wholesome and productive way. Yeah? So yes, we should think about the Dhamma, we should think about the teachings. Yeah? But that process of thinking, if it's done in the right way, then leads to, once more, joy, rapture, tranquility. Yeah? It's not just endless proliferation, yeah? But it's a reflection on the meaning. And so this is part of how we should train ourselves. How do we reflect on the meaning in a wholesome way? If you find that thinking and reflecting on the Dhamma just leads to distraction and endless proliferation and worry, then you're doing it wrong. The problem is not that you're thinking. The problem is that you haven't trained yourself to think in the right way yet. So keep trying. Ask yourself, how can I reflect on this in a way that's more constructive? Yeah? In a way that's more uplifting. How can I be reminding myself of the Dhamma? Yeah? Reminding myself of the meaning. Okay. That's the next one, and then the last one is a certain meditation subject as a foundation of immersion. So this is properly grasped, attended, borne in mind, and comprehended with wisdom. Okay, so this is a slightly difficult idiom to capture in English. So let me just go through the translation. So first of all, we have anyatarang, which means a certain or one of. So it's talking about one of the particular meditations. Then samadhi nimittang, the word here, samadhi nimittang. It's important when reading the suttas to know the word has a different meaning in the suttas than it does in modern day meditation talks. Okay? So in modern day meditation, the word nimitta means basically a light that you see in your meditation. So you meditate, you watch your breath, and then when your mind becomes peaceful, you see a light, and then you absorb into that light. The word nimitta never has that meaning in the suttas. Okay? That's a meaning which is from the Vimukti Magga and the Visuddhi Magga. So when the suttas talk about the light that you experience in meditation, they simply call it a light, bhasa, yeah? Or they call it radiance, prabhasara, or they call it a rupa. A rupa is a form or a vision that you see in meditation. So there's many words that the suttas use to talk about what we call a nimitta today, but they don't use the word nimitta to call those things, right? So when the word nimitta rather means a sign or a cause, okay? So actually the original meaning, when you see a light in your meditation, the word nimitta doesn't mean light. The nimitta basic meaning of it is a sign. So that the light that you see is a sign that your mind is becoming peaceful. Yeah? When we say it's a sign, what do we mean? Like why, in what sense is it a sign? Well, it's a sign because it is an internal representation of how your mind communicates to you. Yeah? The nimitta actually is sanyaja. It's born of perception. It actually isn't anything. There's no light. Yeah? But it's how your mind sends you that message. Yeah? Your mind works in odd ways, like you'll be in sleep and you'll have a dream and your mind will send you an image or something like that. This is how your mind communicates to itself. When you're in meditation, because your mind is becoming very pure, very clean, very bright, the defilements are becoming very low, so it communicates that to you by showing you a light. That's how it manifests. It's just simply the manner of manifestation of mental purity. And that's what we call a nimitta. And it's a sign that your mind is becoming peaceful. So in the suttas, the word nimitta doesn't mean that sign itself, but it has sometimes similar meanings, which is why the meaning gets drawn from there. Often nimitta means a foundation or a basis or a cause. Okay? So the word samadhi nimitta means the foundation of immersion or foundation of samadhi, okay? Which basically means your meditation subject. Actually, with all the fancy words away from you, that's what it means. Okay, so your breath, I'm watching my breath. Actually, the breath is the samadhi nimitta, because the breath is that which you pay attention to, which builds the samadhi. Yeah? Or let's say you contemplate on the parts of the body, and so then that would be your samadhi nimitta. Or you do practice Brahma Viharas, you're doing metta meditation, then the metta would be your samadhi nimitta. It's the basis upon which your samadhi is built. Yeah? So that is what the meaning of it is being used here. All right? First question, easy part, you said, is wisdom a verb? Yes, it can be. So in Pali, the word pajanati is a verb, and panya is the noun. In this case, is the noun. Of course, the word wisdom doesn't have a verb form. So usually we would say understands for the verb and wisdom for the noun. And it's a bit unsatisfactory, and I've dallied with translating it as understanding in all contexts for that reason, so that you can keep the nouns and the verbs aligned. Maybe I should go and do that. Maybe. Would that make it easier? Comprehended with understanding? Yes, maybe, maybe not. Right, it's a good word, right? We don't want to lose it. Yeah, it's a good word. Again, it's another word where there are many more synonyms in Pali than there are in English, so we have to make do. But the idea behind wisdom is that wisdom is yes, to a certain level, is purely an intellectual process of understanding. Okay, so in Thai, for example, then if you want to say that somebody is intelligent, then you could say, oh, they have panya. Yeah, they have wisdom. It just means that they're smart, they're intelligent. Do they use that in Sinhala as well? Is that used to mean intelligent? Yeah, so that's just intelligent, yeah? So that's the same meaning. So it can have an ordinary meaning. It doesn't have to have a profound meaning all the time. Yeah? But when it's applied in Dhamma, then of course it has more resonance. Partly what it means is this. It means that you have understood this small thing in the context of the bigger thing. Yeah? Dhammanu dhammang. Yeah? Making the little dhammas fit into the big dhammas. Yeah? That means, and the big Dhamma, of course, is always the Four Noble Truths. Yeah? So you understand, this is how this matters. This is where this fits into the Four Noble Truths. And so in that sense, the wisdom is always integrative. Right? So this is the kind of the modern psychological term that people would use for this. So wisdom in Buddhism is integrative. Right? That means it brings things together. It unites things. You can see how this thing here fits in with that thing over there. That makes sense. Yeah? And so you're starting to fit things together. So comprehending with wisdom partly has an integrative sense, but it also has an even more potent sense because wisdom in Buddhism is always effective. Wisdom's also a functional term, okay? It doesn't just mean that we understand things in the abstract, right? You can have an integrated understanding, right, of a field. You might understand physics. You might understand philosophy. You might have a great integrated understanding of that whole purpose of that field. But what does it actually do, right? What does it do? And in this respect, Buddhist understanding is very similar to scientific understanding. Scientific understanding is not just good because it's right or because it's accurate. It's good because it works, because you can use it to do stuff. Yeah, that's why science matters. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the philosophy of science recently, and people think about like scientific method. Yeah, so we're going to understand, we're going to use this method, and we're going to define it by this method. But actually, method is meaningless. Who cares what method you use, right? I don't care what method that they used to make this building. I don't care what software the engineers used, or what university they went to, or how deep their understanding was. I only care about one thing: is it going to fall down? That's it. So that science of engineering, is the building going to fall down on us? That's what matters. It's how effective it is. Yeah? It's the same thing with Buddhism. The most important thing about wisdom is, does it work? Yeah? Is it going to free you from suffering? Yeah? That's all that matters at the end of the day. Yeah? So everything else is in service of freeing us from suffering. So the wisdom is, on the one hand, just to recap, is on the one hand an intellectual understanding, but it's an intellectual understanding that is integrative and which is effective. Yeah?
Is wisdom and insight sort of similar?
Sorry?
Wisdom and insight?
Yes, wisdom and insight are basically the same. When we use the word vipassana, which we translate as insight, usually what that means is wisdom as it's developed through meditation. So it's a bit more specific. Like you can see here, wisdom is used in a more general sense. Yeah. So when used in the context of meditation, we usually use vipassana. Yeah. So again, that's what I was saying. Like these words, they mean the same thing actually, but they have a particular context. Yeah. All right. So we're good. We'll do just one more sutta and then we'll wrap up for today, for the teaching. I can see people get a bit sleepy. So so we've got a few teachings here which are kind of on the same theme. Mendicants, so this is Anguttara Nikaya number 1.140 to 149. Mendicants, those mendicants who explain what is not the teaching as not the teaching, are acting for the welfare and happiness of the people, for the benefit, welfare and happiness of gods and humans. They make much merit and make the true teaching continue. Mendicants, those mendicants who explain what is the teaching as the teaching, are acting for the welfare and happiness of the people, for the benefit, welfare and happiness of gods and human. They make much merit and make the true teaching continue. And similarly, we go on from the teaching to the monastic law, to what was spoken and stated by the realized one, to what was practiced by the realized one, what was prescribed by the realized one, and so on. So this is talking about one of the standards of truth that we bring to our Dhamma practice. I find it an interesting point of contrast between early Buddhism and what we find in Buddhism today. So what I think we find all too often is that people will, when people have an idea which is different to what the Buddha's idea was, okay, then they will try to kind of twist it around or slip it around and sort of get it in and say, well, this is what the Buddha was really teaching. So I'm thinking of things, for example, like, say, belief in rebirth. Yeah? So a lot of people today don't believe in rebirth. Yeah? It's all right. You don't believe in rebirth. It's perfectly reasonable, actually. It's a very rational belief. Yeah? And if someone doesn't believe in rebirth, okay, it makes sense. Yeah? But clearly the Buddha believed in rebirth. So if you want to say, I don't agree with the Buddha, all right, so that's okay. The Buddha didn't mind if people disagreed with him. Yeah? It happens all the time in the suttas. People come up, they say, oh, this one and the Buddha, and they have a conversation about it. That's all right. Yeah? We're adults. We understand that people have different ideas, and good faith, intelligent people can have different ideas about these things. And that particular case of understanding rebirth, I think it's a very reasonable point of view. I mean, there's so much evidence that says when you die, your brain stops working, you just go back to the earth, and I mean, it's a rational belief to think that's all there is, and there's no such thing as rebirth. Yeah? I think there's also reason to believe in rebirth. I personally believe in rebirth. I think there is reason to believe it. But it's not reasonable to say that the Buddha didn't believe in it. To say, because I didn't believe in it, therefore I'm going to sort of change, when the Buddha was talking about rebirth, he was talking about spiritual rebirth. Yeah? Well, actually, no, he wasn't. He was talking about getting reborn, and, when you read the suttas, it's very clear that's what he means. So, if you have a doubt about the teaching, it's okay. You say, I have a doubt about that. That's all right. If you read something in the suttas that you disagree with, it's all right. It's okay, right? You're not going to have, there's no like Saka hovering above your head with his thunderbolt in his hand, who's ready to send his thunderbolt down and split your head into 7 pieces if you say something that disagrees with the suttas. Like, it's all right, really, it's okay. Yeah? But then you just say, okay, I didn't understand that, or I didn't really agree with that, or something. And then we can have a conversation, because then that can open up to learning. But if you take something that the Buddha is teaching and then you twist it and say the Buddha was teaching something else, that the Buddha got very annoyed by. I don't know if the Buddha could get annoyed, probably not, but if he could get annoyed, he was annoyed by that, okay? And he was very upset. Yeah? How can you, foolish man, say that I taught this thing? This was not what I said. This is not the teachings of the Buddha. Yeah? And so this is something to be very conscientious about. I've given a number of teachings over the last few years on Buddhist epistemology, on how we can know things. And one of the principles that the Buddha taught about how we know things is to not misrepresent our sources. If we believe that this is the case, then we say, I believe that this is the case. We don't say, this is the case. Yeah? If we think it's the case, and we say, I think it's the case. We don't say, it is the case. It's going too far. Yeah? So we stick close to the evidence. And if we have a belief, we have a feeling, we have a worry, then we say, this is the feeling I have, this is this thought I have, this is this belief I have. Yeah? That way we always stick to the truth. So this is something that I'm always very conscious of when I'm doing my work with the suttas. I'm doing my translation work. I'm we can come on in a minute, that my responsibility as a custodian of the suttas and as a translator of the suttas is to be as transparent as possible. And it's not to impose my views on the suttas, not to try to interpret it in a way that, fits what I think and I believe. So of course I have to use my own ideas. Obviously there's no other way of doing it, but I try to keep that as little as possible and as transparent as possible. But always trying to let the Buddha speak. This is the aim of a translator. If I have opinions about things, I'll write an essay. That's okay. Or I'll give a talk or something, and I'll express my opinions. But in the suttas, you keep everything as clean as possible and just let those words come through as clearly as we can. So again, this is part of that skill, and that skill of mindfulness and equanimity that we bring to our Dhamma practice. The ability to set aside our own views, our own beliefs, and to consider what the Buddha is saying.